In the fog-shrouded depths of Blackthorn Manor, a single gunshot shatters the night, and Sir Reginald Blackthorn lies dead in a locked room. No weapon, no escape, only secrets. Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, steps into a web of lies spun by a judge with a tainted past, an heiress hiding a scandal, a war-scarred veteran with a grudge, and a priest whose silence screams guilt. Who pulled the trigger? What moral dilemma drove them to murder? And why does Poirot's final choice shock even himself? Unravel a tale of betrayal, blackmail, and buried truths where every clue twists the knife deeper, leading to a revelation that will leave you questioning justice itself. Chapter 1. The invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The rain lashed against the windows of Hercule Poirot's London flat, a relentless autumn downpour that turned the cobblestones outside into a glistening mirror of gaslight. Inside, the air was warm, scented with the faint musk of polished oak and the sharp tang of Poirot's morning tisane. He sat at his desk, his small, precise hands arranging a stack of correspondence with the meticulous care of a jeweler sorting gems. The world outside might be chaotic, but within these walls, order reigned supreme. Poirot's mustache twitched as he slid open an envelope with a silver letter opener, its blade catching the flicker of the fireplace. The letter was penned on heavy cream paper, the kind that whispered wealth and secrecy. The handwriting was elegant, with a flourish that suggested both confidence and urgency. He adjusted his pince-nez and began to read. My dear Monsieur Poirot, your reputation as a man of unparalleled intellect precedes you. I am Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, mistress of Blackthorn Manor in the Yorkshire moors. I write to request your presence at a gathering this weekend, one that promises to test even your formidable skills. A matter of great moral weight hangs over my home, and I believe only you can unravel its threads. I cannot say more in writing, save that one among my guests harbors a secret that threatens us all. Will you come? A car will await you at King's Cross Station, Friday at noon. Yours in hope. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his green eyes narrowing. A moral dilemma? A secret? The words danced in his mind like the opening notes of a symphony, each promising a crescendo of intrigue. He glanced at the clock. 10 o'clock, Thursday morning. Time enough to prepare, but not to dawdle. He rang the bell for his valet, Georges, who appeared with the silent efficiency of a shadow. Georges, Poirot said, folding the letter with a crisp snap, prepare my traveling case. I depart for Yorkshire tomorrow, and ensure my grey Homburg is pressed the moors, I suspect, will demand a certain gravitas. Very good, sir, Georges replied, his voice as smooth as the polished floor. Shall I inform Captain Hastings? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Non, mon ami. Hastings is, I believe, entangled in a golfing excursion. This time, Poirot shall face the mystery alone. By noon the next day, Poirot stood on the platform at King's Cross, his impeccable gray suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the bustling crowd of travelers. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp wool, and the station hummed with the clatter of trains and the shouts of porters. A driver in a black cap approached, his face weathered like old leather. Monsieur Poirot? He asked, touching his cap. On Tompkins, sent by Lady Blackthorn. Poirot nodded, noting the man's nervous glance over his shoulder. Lead on, monsieur. The car, a sleek Rolls-Royce, wound through London's smog before breaking free into the countryside. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, the landscape shifted to the wild, rolling moors of Yorkshire. Heather stretched in purple waves, interrupted only by jagged outcrops of stone. The air grew colder, and a mist began to curl around the car, like ghostly fingers. Blackthorn Manor emerged from the fog like a spectre, its gray stone towers clawing at the sky. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows glowed with an amber warmth that seemed at odds with the desolate surroundings. As the car crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, Poirot stepped out, his breath visible in the chill air. The Manners. Oak door swung open, revealing a woman in her 50s. Her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her eyes, sharp and blue, assessed Poirot with a mix of hope and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and cultured. "I'm Lady Eleanor. Welcome to Blackthorn Manor." Poirot bowed, his mustache gleaming in the lamplight. "Madame, it is an honor. Your letter, it intrigues me greatly." She offered a tight smile. "Come inside. The others are waiting." The entrance hall was a cavern of dark wood and flickering candles, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. A massive chandelier hung above, its crystals catching the light like frozen tears. Lady Eleanor led Poirot to a drawing-room where 4 figures stood or sat, their postures stiff with the unease of strangers thrust together. "Allow me to introduce my guests," Lady Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the room's heavy silence. She gestured to a man with a hawkish face and white hair, his posture rigid as a soldier's. "Sir Harold Grayson, a retired judge of the King's Bench." Grayson nodded curtly, his gray eyes cold. "Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you." Next, a young woman in a green silk dress, her auburn hair cascading in waves. Miss Clara Winthrop, heiress to the Winthrop textile fortune. Clara's smile was fleeting, her fingers twisting a pearl bracelet. "A pleasure, monsieur." A broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his face scarred and weathered, stood by the fireplace. Captain James Harrow, late of the Royal Fusiliers. Harrow's handshake was firm, but his eyes darted to the door. "Heard you're a clever sort, Poirot." Finally, a thin man in black clerical robes, his hands clasped tightly. "Father Ambrose, our local vicar." The priest's nod was slight, his voice barely a whisper. "God's peace be with you?" Poirot's gaze swept over them, cataloging details. Grayson's polished cufflinks, Clara's nervous tick, Harrow's calloused knuckles, Ambrose's worn prayer book. Each was a piece in a puzzle he had yet to assemble. "Dinner will be served shortly," Lady Eleanor said. "Monsieur Poirot, may I show you to your room?" As they climbed the grand staircase, Poirot noted the manor's oppressive atmosphere creaking floorboards, distant draughts, the faint scent of mildew. His room was luxurious but cold, its 4-poster bed draped in heavy velvet. A fire crackled in the grate, doing little to dispel the chill. "Madame," Poirot said as Lady Eleanor turned to leave, "your letter spoke of a moral dilemma. Might you elaborate?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not yet, monsieur. Tonight you will meet the others in full. Observe them. One among us hides a truth that endangers this house. I trust you will see what I cannot." She departed, leaving Poirot to unpack his case. He arranged his toiletries with precision, his mind already turning over her words. A secret, yes, but of what nature? A crime? A betrayal? The little gray cells, they were already at work. Dinner was a formal affair in a dining room lit by candelabras, the table laden with crystal and silver. The guests sat in uneasy silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery and the howl of the wind outside. Poirot, seated at Lady Eleanor's right, observed each guest with the intensity of a hawk. Grayson's fingers trembled slightly as he sipped his wine. Clara's eyes flicked to Harrow, who stared resolutely at his plate. Ambrose murmured a prayer before eating, his voice barely audible. The meal roast pheasant, glazed carrots, and a rich claret was exquisite, but the tension was palpable. Lady Eleanor, at the head of the table, steered the conversation with practiced ease, touching on politics, literature, and the moor's haunting beauty. Yet her eyes, like Poirot's, never cease their scrutiny. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, Grayson said abruptly, his voice cutting through a lull, how does a man of your unique profession approach a mystery? Do you seek facts, or do you chase motives? Poirot smiled, dabbing his lips with a napkin. Both, Sir Harold. The facts, they are the skeleton. The motives, they are the flesh. One without the other is incomplete. Clara laughed, a brittle sound. That's rather poetic for a detective. Poetry, mademoiselle, is merely truth. In a pleasing disguise, Poirot replied, his eyes locking onto hers. She flushed and looked away. Harrow cleared his throat. Ever been stumped, Poirot? A case you couldn't crack? Never, Captain, Poirot said, his tone light but firm. The little gray cells, they do not fail me. Though I confess, some puzzles demand more patience than others. Ambrose's fork paused mid-air. Patience is a virtue, monsieur, but truth can be a burden. The room fell silent, the priest's words hanging like a storm cloud. Lady Eleanor rose, her chair scraping softly. Shall we adjourn to the drawing-room for coffee? As the guests moved, Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on a small detail. A single lavender petal on the floor near Clara's chair. He bent to retrieve it, his fingers brushing the carpet. Lavender, he mused. An unusual scent for a dining room. He tucked the petal into his pocket, a tiny clue in a game that had only begun in the drawing room. The fire roared, casting shadows that danced across the guests' faces. Coffee was served, and the conversation turned to lighter topics, but Poirot sensed an undercurrent of fear. Lady Eleanor drew him aside, her voice low. Monsieur Poirot, she murmured, I must speak plainly. My brother, Sir Reginald Blackthorne, resides in this house. He is unwell, and his actions have stirred unrest among us. Tonight I will reveal more, but I beg you to watch closely. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Sir Reginald? A name unspoken until now. The source of the secret, perhaps? Before he could reply, a scream tore through the manor, sharp and piercing. The guests froze, cups clattering to saucers. Lady Eleanor's face paled as she rushed toward the sound, Poirot close behind. The others followed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. The scream had come from the west wing, where a heavy oak door stood ajar. Lady Eleanor pushed it open, revealing a study lit by a single lamp. A man lay slumped at a desk, his head resting on a blotter stained with crimson. A gunshot wound marred his temple, and the air carried the acrid bite of gunpowder. Reginald! Lady Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the scene. The room was locked from the inside, the windows bolted. No weapon was visible. A shattered teacup lay on the floor, its contents pooling beside a leather-bound book, slightly askew on a shelf. The scent of lavender lingered, faint but unmistakable. He turned to the guests, their faces a gallery of shock and fear. Mies. Amos, he said, his voice steady, this is no accident. Sir Reginald has been murdered. The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of his words settling like dust. Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, searching for the flicker of guilt, the shadow of a lie. The game, it seemed, had truly begun. And yet, as the guests dispersed to their rooms, whispering and glancing over their shoulders, Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The puzzle was complex, the stakes high, but Hercule Poirot thrived on such challenges. He retired to his room, the lavender petal in his pocket, a silent promise of truths yet to be uncovered. Chapter 2. The Locked Room Riddle. The dining hall of Blackthorne Manor gleamed under the flickering light of a chandelier, its crystals casting prismatic shadows across the long mahogany table. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant, mulled wine, and the faint musk of old wood. Hercule Poirot sat at the far end, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly in his lap, his mustache twitching slightly as he observed the guests around him. The evening had begun with polite chatter, but an undercurrent of unease rippled through the room, stirred by Lady Eleanor Blackthorn's cryptic words at the gathering's outset. One among us harbors a secret that festers in the shadows. The retired judge, Sir Henry Caldwell, presided over his plate with the stern dignity of a man accustomed to passing sentences. His white hair was slicked back, and his eyes, sharp as flint, darted occasionally toward the others. Across from him, Clara Worthing, the young heiress, toyed nervously with her pearl necklace, her delicate features betraying a flicker of unease. Captain Edmund Harrow, the war veteran, sat ramrod straight, his weathered face betraying no emotion, though his fingers drummed faintly against the tablecloth. Father Ambrose, the secretive priest, murmured a quiet prayer before sipping his wine, his hooded eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Lady Eleanor herself, regal in a velvet gown the color of midnight, presided at the head of the table, her smile both gracious and impenetrable. Poirot's mind catalogued every gesture, every glance. He had accepted Lady Eleanor's invitation, not merely for the promise of a weekend in the Yorkshire moors, but for the challenge her letter had dangled before him. A moral dilemma wrapped in a mystery. You, Monsieur Poirot, are uniquely suited to unravel what others cannot, she had written. The words had intrigued him, for they suggested not just a puzzle, but a test of his principles. Now, as the guests exchanged pleasantries, he sensed the truth in her warning. Something was amiss in Blackthorn Manor. The meal progressed through its courses, the conversation touching on safe topics, the weather, the state of the moors, the history of the manor itself. Poirot, ever the observer, noted how each guest seemed to guard their words, as if afraid to reveal too much. Clara's laughter was too bright, Sir Henry's anecdotes too rehearsed, and Captain Harrow's silence too deliberate. Father Ambrose spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried a weight that made the others pause. It was during the dessert. Corsa delicate lemon tart, served with clotted cream that the evening shattered. A scream sharp and piercing tore through the dining hall, freezing every guest in their seat. It came from the direction of the west wing, where the manor's private quarters lay. Lady Eleanor's face paled, her wine-glass trembling in her hand. That was from the study, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his small frame moving with surprising agility. Mies Amos remained calm, he said, his voice steady but commanding. We must investigate at once. The guests followed, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls as they hurried toward the source of the scream. The study door was closed, its heavy oak surface unyielding. Lady Eleanor fumbled with a key, her hands shaking as she unlocked. This is Reginald's study, she said, her voice tight. My brother, he often works late. The door swung open, revealing a scene that stopped them all in their tracks. Sir Reginald Blackthorn lay slumped over his desk, a single gunshot wound marring his temple. Blood pooled on the polished wood, staining a scattering of papers. The room was silent save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. The windows were locked, the curtains undisturbed. There was no weapon in sight. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room with surgical precision. The guests crowded behind him, their gasps and murmurs filling the air. Clara clutched Captain Harrow's arm, her face ashen. Sir Henry muttered something about a dreadful business, while Father Ambrose crossed himself, his lips moving in silent prayer. Lady Eleanor stood frozen, her eyes fixed on her brother's lifeless form. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his voice low but clear. This is no accident. This is murder. The word hung in the air, heavy as the mist that clung to the moors. Outside, The guests exchanged glances, each searching the others for signs of guilt or fear. Poirot knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Sir Reginald's face was contorted in a final expression of surprise, his eyes wide and unseeing. The wound was clean, the bullet having entered at a precise angle. Poirot's fingers brushed the edge of the desk, where a shattered teacup lay in pieces. Its contents, a dark, fragrant tea, spilled across the floor. "Curio," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. He leaned closer, inhaling deeply. A faint scent lingered in the air, not of tea, but of something sweeter, almost floral. "Lavandi," he murmured to himself. "Lavender." It was an odd note in a room otherwise heavy with the smells of leather, ink, and blood. He rose and surveyed the study. The room was a fortress of solitude, its walls lined with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. A single book, a worn copy of Dante's Inferno, lay askew on a shelf, its spine slightly misaligned. Poirot's gaze lingered on it, his mind already turning over possibilities. The windows, he confirmed, were indeed locked from the inside, their latches rusted with age. The door, too, had been locked when they arrived, and Lady Eleanor had used the only key. "Impossible," Sir Henry said, his voice gruff. The room was sealed. No one could have entered or left without being seen. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Impossible, you say?" "Non, mon ami. The impossible is merely the improbable in disguise. Hercule Poirot does not believe in impossibilities." He turned to the guests, his green eyes gleaming with intensity. "We must establish the facts. Who was the last to see Sir Reginald alive?" "Lady?" Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady despite her pallor. "I saw him after tea, around 6 o'clock. He said he had work to finish and retired to his study. I didn't see him again until—" Her voice broke, and she gestured toward the body and the scream. Poirot pressed. "Who uttered it?" "That was me," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I was passing by the west wing on my way to my room when I heard a loud noise, a bang, like a firecracker. I thought it was odd, so I knocked on the study door. There was no answer, so I tried the handle, but it was locked. Then I looked through the keyhole and saw him." She shuddered, burying her face in her hands. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A gunshot, a locked room, no weapon. The puzzle was exquisite, a challenge worthy of his little gray cells. He turned his attention to the desk, where papers were scattered haphazardly. A ledger caught his eye, its pages filled with numbers and cryptic annotations. Beside it lay a fountain pen, its nib still wet with ink, as if Sir Reginald had been writing moments before his death. "Lady Eleanor," Poirot said. "This ledger, did your brother often work with such documents?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Reginald was meticulous about his finances. He managed the estate's accounts himself. Poirot flipped through the ledger, noting entries that seemed unusually large for a country estate. "And these sums," he said, pointing to a column of figures, "they are substantial. Investments, perhaps." Lady Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the other guests. Reginald had many business interests. He was ambitious. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ambitious men make enemies, non? We shall see." He moved to the shattered teacup, kneeling to examine the fragments. The tea had dried into a sticky residue, but the lavender scent was unmistakable. He picked up a shard, turning it over in his gloved hand. "This cup," he said. "It was not dropped by accident. The force of its breaking suggests it was thrown or struck." Captain Harrow frowned. "You think someone smashed it deliberately?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. "Or perhaps it was a casualty of a struggle we have yet to understand." The guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Poirot and the body. Father Ambrose cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, surely this is a matter for the police. A man is dead, and we are all shaken. Poirot's smile was tight. The police, they will come. But Hercule Poirot does not wait for others to unravel what is before him. The truth, it is here, in this room, in these clues, in your faces, and I shall find it. He turned to the bookshelf, his fingers brushing the spine of Dante's Inferno. This book, he said, pulling it from the shelf, it is out of place. The others are aligned with precision, but this one, it protrudes. Why? He opened the book, flipping through its pages. A slip of paper fell out, fluttering to the floor. Poirot retrieved it, his eyes scanning the handwritten note. It was a single line, scrawled in haste. Meet me at midnight. The truth must be buried. The guests gasped, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. Poirot held up a hand, silencing them. This note, he said, it is a thread in our tapestry of mystery, but it is not the only one. The lavender, the teacup, the ledger, the locked door, they all speak, if we listen. He turned to Lady Eleanor. You said this door was locked, and you had the only key. Yet Miss Worthing heard a bang and found the door unyielding. Tell me, was this study often locked when Sir Reginald was inside? Yes, Lady Eleanor said, her voice firm. He valued his privacy. No one entered without his permission. And yet, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming, someone did. The grandfather clock chimed, its deep toll resonating through the room. Poirot's gaze swept over the guests, each of whom seemed to shrink under his scrutiny. This is murder, he said again, his voice cutting through the silence. And the murderer, they are clever. But Hercule Poirot is more clever still. He stepped back, gesturing to the body. We shall leave this room as it is until the police arrive. But know this, the little gray cells, they are already at work. The truth, it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. As the guests filed out, there, faces a mixture of shock and suspicion, Poirot lingered, his eyes fixed on the study. The lavender scent lingered in his nostrils. The note burned in his memory, and the puzzle of the locked room danced in his mind. This was no ordinary murder, and the manor held secrets that would not yield easily. But yield they would, for Hercule Poirot had never met a mystery he could not solve. The night stretched on, the moors outside whispering their own secrets as the manor settled into an uneasy silence. And in the study, the body of Sir Reginald. Blackthorn lay still, a mute witness to the enigma that would consume them all. Chapter 3. Whispers of Motive. The dining hall of Blackthorn Manor was a cavernous space, its high ceilings lost in shadows where the chandelier's dim glow failed to reach. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the flicker of candlelight, casting eerie distortions of the guests' faces. Hercule Poirot sat at one end, his small, fastidious frame dwarfed by the grandeur, yet his presence commanded the room. His mustache twitched as he sipped his tisane, his sharp, green eyes darting from one guest to another, cataloging every gesture, every fleeting expression. The air was thick with unease, the clink of silverware against porcelain sounding like gunshots in the silence that followed Sir Reginald's death. The retired judge, Sir Archibald Vance, sat ramrod straight, his white hair gleaming like a halo. Under the chandelier, his fingers toyed with the stem of a wineglass he hadn't touched, his lips pressed into a thin line. Across from him, Clara Langley, the young heiress, fidgeted with her napkin, her delicate features pale but resolute, as though steeling herself against an unseen threat. Captain Daniel Harrow, the war veteran, slouched slightly, his broad shoulders tense, his scarred hand resting near a butter knife as if it were a weapon. Father Ambrose, the priest, sat at the far end, his dark robes blending into the gloom. his eyes downcast, fingers tracing the edge of a silver cross pendant. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne, their hostess, presided over the table with a strained smile, her elegant hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot set down his cup with a deliberate clink, breaking the silence. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of authority, "the death of Sir Reginald is no mere tragedy. It is, as I have said, a murder. And to solve it, we must uncover the motives that lie hidden in the hearts of those present." His gaze swept the table, lingering on each face. "I propose we begin with a simple question. What was your connection to Sir Reginald?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Clara's napkin slipped from her fingers, landing in a crumpled heap on the table. Sir Archibald cleared his throat, a dry, grating sound. Captain Harrow's jaw tightened, and Father Ambrose's fingers stilled on his cross. Lady Eleanor's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her voice smooth as silk. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't suspect us all? Reginald was. Difficult, but we are his guests, not his enemies." Poirot's eyes twinkled with something between amusement and steel. "Madame, in my experience, the line between guest and enemy is often thin. Let us begin with Sir Archibald. You, monsieur, were a judge of great renown. Did your path cross with Sir Reginald's in matters of law?" Sir Archibald's face reddened, his bushy brows knitting together. "You presume much, Poirot," he said, his voice a low growl, "but I'll humor you. Yes, I knew Reginald. Years ago, I presided over a case involving his textile empire. He was accused of fraud-shoddy goods sold at premium prices. Investors swindled. I ruled against him. His business took a blow, but he recovered. Men like Reginald always do." He leaned back, folding his arms. That was the extent of it. Ancient history. Poirot tilted his head, his fingers steepled. "Ancient history, you say, yet the memory seems to stir strong feelings. Tell me, Sir Archibald, did Sir Reginald ever seek retribution for your ruling?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "He sent letters. Angry ones. Called me biased, corrupt even. But that was a decade ago. I've heard worse from better men." He waved a hand dismissively, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in his fingers. "Merci, Sir Archibald," Poirot said, turning to Clara. "Mademoiselle Langley, you are young, yet your eyes carry a weight. What was your connection to the deceased?" Clara's lips parted, then closed. She glanced at Lady Eleanor, who gave a subtle nod, as if granting permission. I was engaged to Reginald," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. A collective intake of breath followed. Captain Harrow's hand clenched around the butter knife, and Father Ambrose's head snapped up, his eyes sharp for the first time. "Engaged?" Poirot repeated, his tone gentle but probing. A curious choice for a man of Sir Reginald's age and reputation. "When was this, mademoiselle?" 2 years ago," Clara said, her voice steadier now. "It was brief. He proposed after. A whirlwind courtship. I was young, foolish, dazzled by his charm and wealth. But I broke it off when I saw his true nature cruel, controlling. He didn't take it well." Her eyes flickered to the table, avoiding the other's stares. "He threatened to ruin my family, said he'd expose secrets about my father's business. But I stood my ground. I haven't spoken to him since." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And yet, mademoiselle, you accepted Lady Eleanor's invitation to this gathering. Why return to the lion's den?" Clara's cheeks flushed. I wanted to face him, to show him I wasn't afraid anymore. And Lady Eleanor assured me it would be safe." She glanced at her hostess, who offered a tight smile. "Very well," Poirot said, turning to Captain Harrow. "Monsieur Harrow, you have the bearing of a soldier, yet your eyes speak of battles beyond the battlefield. What was your tie to? Sir Reginald? Harrow's scarred hand relaxed, but his voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. Reginald and I served together in the war. He was my commanding officer. A coward who sent good men to die while he hid in his tent. I lost friends because of him. When I saw his name on the invitation, I came to confront him, to demand an apology. I never got the chance. His gaze darkened, fixed on the table. Maybe someone else settled the score for me. Poirot's mustache twitched. A strong motive, monsieur. Hatred born of betrayal is a powerful force. Did you see Sir Reginald on the night of his death? Harrow's eyes met Poirot's, unflinching. I saw him at dinner. We exchanged words, sharp ones. He laughed off my accusations, called me. A broken relic. I left him in the drawing room, alive. That's all I know. Merci, Poirot said, his gaze sliding to Father Ambrose. And you, mon père? You have been silent, yet your silence speaks volumes. What bound you to Sir Reginald? The priest's fingers tightened around his cross, his voice low and measured. I knew Sir Reginald through his charitable works. He donated generously to my parish. But he was not a man of virtue. I came here to urge him to repent, to seek forgiveness for his sins. I failed. His eyes dropped to his lap, and Poirot noted the faintest tremble in his hands. Failed, you say? Poirot mused. Yet you remain here, among those who might share his sins. Why, Father Ambrose? The priest's lips thinned. To offer guidance, Monsieur Poirot. Even the guilty deserve a chance at redemption. Poirot leaned back, his eyes narrowing. A noble sentiment, but in a house of secrets, redemption is often a mask for guilt. Merci, Father. He turned to Lady Eleanor. And you, madame? Your brother's death has shaken this house. What light can you shed? Lady Eleanor's smile was brittle. Reginald was my brother, but we were not close. He was difficult, as I said. His business, dealings, his temper, they drove a wedge between us. I invited him here, hoping to mend things, to bring peace to our family. Instead, her voice broke as she pressed a handkerchief to her lips. I only wish I'd acted sooner. Poirot's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. A tragedy, indeed. Yet I sense there is more you have not said. Perhaps, in time, we? The meal ended in strained silence, the guests dispersing to their rooms. Poirot lingered in the dining hall, his mind racing. Each guest had a motive, a thread of anger or shame tying them to Sir Reginald. But motives alone did not solve a murder. He needed evidence, something tangible to unravel the web of lies. He slipped into the study where Sir Reginald had died. The room now silent, but for the tick of a grandfather clock. The shattered teacup still lay on the floor, its porcelain shards glinting in the moonlight. Poirot knelt, examining the pieces. The break was uneven, suggesting force of struggle, perhaps. The faint scent of lavender lingered, a clue he'd noted earlier. He scanned the room, his eyes settling on the massive oak desk, its surface cluttered with papers and a leather-bound ledger. Poirot opened the ledger, flipping through pages of financial records. Names, dates, sums nothing unusual for a man of Reginald's wealth. But tucked between the pages was a folded letter, its edges worn, as if handled often. He unfolded it, carefully, his heart quickening. The letter was addressed to Sir Reginald, written in a hurried, slanted script. You think your secrets are safe, but I know the truth. The fortune you stole will be your undoing. Meet me at midnight in the garden, or the world will know what you did. No signature, but the paper bore a faint watermark, a crest, Poirot recognized as belonging to a local stationery shop. The letter hinted at a scandal, a stolen fortune, and a confrontation that might have led to murder. He tucked it into his pocket, his mind alight with possibilities. As he left the study, A shadow moved in the corridor. Poirot froze his hand on the doorknob. The shadow resolved into Clara, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I couldn't sleep. I heard something voices in the garden." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Voices, mademoiselle? At this hour?" She nodded, clutching her shawl. "I looked out my window. There were two figures near the rose arbor. I couldn't see who, but they were arguing. One voice was angry, desperate. I thought you should know." "Merci, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone calm but urgent. "Return to your room and lock the door. I will investigate." Clara hesitated, then nodded, disappearing down the corridor. Poirot slipped into the garden, the night air cool and heavy with the scent of roses. The moon cast long shadows, turning the manicured hedges into looming specters. He moved silently, his polished shoes sinking into the damp grass. Near the rose arbor, he found signs of a struggle broken twigs, a trampled flower bed. And there, caught on a thorn, was a scrap of fabric, dark and coarse, unlike the fine linens of the manor's guests. He pocketed the fabric, his mind racing. The letter, the voices, the fabric, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He returned to the manor, his steps deliberate, his thoughts a whirlwind of suspicion. The guests' stories had revealed motives, but the truth lay in their silences, their glances, their lies. And Poirot, with his little gray cells, was determined to uncover it. The next morning, breakfast was a tense affair. The guests sat in silence, their eyes darting to Poirot as he entered, the scrap of fabric earning a hole in his pocket. He smiled, his demeanor serene, but his mind was a steel trap, ready to spring. "Bon matin," he said, taking his seat. "Today we shall dig deeper into the heart of this mystery. And I assure you, Mies Amos, the truth will not remain hidden for long." The day unfolded with Poirot conducting private interviews in the Manor's library, a wood-paneled room lined with leather-bound tomes and heavy velvet curtains. He began with Sir Archibald, who sat stiffly in an armchair, his hands clasped tightly. "Sir Archibald," Poirot said, his voice smooth as velvet, "your ruling against Sir Reginald cost him dearly. Did he ever confront you directly?" The judge's eyes flickered. "Once, at a London club. He was drunk, belligerent, said I'd ruined him out of spite. I told him to take it up with the courts. He stormed off. That was the last I saw of him until this weekend." Poirot leaned forward. "And yet you came to this gathering. Why, monsieur, if the memory was so unpleasant?" Sir Archibald's jaw tightened. "Eleanor invited me. Said it was a chance to clear the air. I thought perhaps Reginald had changed. I was wrong." Poirot nodded, dismissing him with a polite smile. Next came Clara, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "your broken engagement with Sir Reginald suggests a deep wound. Did he contact you after you ended things?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she held her chin high. "He sent letters, cruel ones. Called me a fool. Said I'd regret crossing him. I burned them all. When Eleanor invited me, I thought I could prove I'd moved on. But being here, it's like he's still controlling me." Poirot's gaze softened. "You are stronger than you know, mademoiselle. Did you see Sir Reginald alone on the night he died?" She shook her head. "No, I avoided him after dinner. I was in my room reading when I heard the scream." Poirot noted her trembling hands, her earnest tone. He dismissed her gently, then called for Captain Harrow. The veteran entered, his limp more pronounced today, his eyes bloodshot. "Monsieur Harrow," Poirot said, "your hatred for Sir Reginald is palpable. Tell me, what happened during your sharp words at dinner?" Harrow's fists clenched. He mocked me, called me a coward for surviving when others didn't. I told him he was the coward, hiding behind his rank while men died. I wanted to hit him, Poirot, but I didn't. I walked away. And where did you go? Poirot asked, his eyes piercing. To the billiard room. I played alone, trying to cool off. Ask the butler, he saw me there. Poirot made a mental note to verify. This. Merci, Captain. You may go. Father Ambrose was the last, his dark robes absorbing the light as he sat. Mon père, Poirot said, your silence intrigues me. You spoke of Sir Reginald's sins. What sins, precisely? The priest's eyes were shadowed. His greed, his cruelty. He used his wealth to manipulate, to destroy. I tried to guide him, but he laughed at faith. I came here to try one last time. And did you speak with him alone? Poirot pressed. Ambrose hesitated. Briefly, after dinner. He was in the study. I urged him to confess his wrongs. He dismissed me, said he answered to no one. Poirot leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly. And yet you stayed. Why? To pray for his soul, Ambrose said, his voice barely audible. And for the others in this house? Poirot dismissed him, his mind churning. Each guest had a motive, a grievance, but none had confessed to more than words with Sir Reginald. The letter in his pocket, the fabric in the garden, they pointed to something deeper, a conspiracy perhaps. He decided to revisit the study, hoping for another clue. The study was as he'd left it, the air still heavy with the scent of lavender. He searched the desk again, his fingers brushing against a hidden panel. With a soft click, it sprang open, revealing a small compartment. Inside was a second letter, this one in a different hand, precise and elegant. Reginald, your time is up. The truth about the Marston deal will come out unless you pay. Meet me at the arbor, midnight, the Marston deal. Poirot's mind raced. He'd heard whispers of it in London, a shady transaction involving stolen funds tied to Reginald's empire. This letter confirmed the scandal hinted at in the first. But who wrote it? The crest was the same, but the handwriting suggested another player, someone not yet revealed. As evening fell, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room, the letter and fabric hidden in his pocket. Mise Amos, he said, his voice calm, but commanding. I have found evidence that points to a scandalous stolen fortune, a secret meeting. Sir Reginald was not merely disliked. He was a man with enemies who acted in the shadows. I ask you now, who among you knows of the Marston deal? The room went still. Sir Archibald's face paled, Clara's eyes widened, Harrow's jaw tightened, and Ambrose's fingers clutched his cross. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice sharp. Monsieur Poirot, what are you implying? My brother was no saint, but this talk of scandals. Is the truth, madame? Poirot interrupted, his tone firm. And the truth will lead us to the killer. I suggest you all reflect on what you know. Tomorrow, I will have more questions. The guests dispersed, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Poirot retired to his room, the letters and fabric laid out on his desk. He stared at them, his little gray cells working furiously. The Marston deal, the midnight meeting, the voices in the garden, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit. And somewhere, among these guests, was the hand that wove it. The chapter closed with Poirot lighting a candle, its flame casting shadows on the letters. He murmured to himself, the truth is close, Hercule Poirot, very close. And with that, he blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness, a fitting metaphor for the mystery he was determined to unravel. Chapter 4. The Midnight Confession. The air in Blackthorn Manor had grown heavier since the discovery of Sir Reginald's body. The once warm glow of the chandeliers seemed to flicker with unease, casting long, wavering shadows across the oak-paneled dining room where the guests had gathered earlier. Now, Well past midnight, the manor was cloaked in silence, save for the occasional creak of ancient floorboards and the distant howl of the wind sweeping across the Yorkshire moors. Hercule Poirot, however, was far from sleep. His mind, sharp as ever, churned through the details of the locked room riddle. Each clue a thread in a tapestry he was determined to unravel. Poirot sat in his guest room, a modest yet elegant space with a four-poster bed and a mahogany writing desk. A single candle burned low, its flame dancing in the draught that slipped through the window's ill-fitting frame. His notebook lay open before him, filled with meticulous notes in his precise, slanted handwriting. The shattered teacup, the faint scent of lavender, the misplaced book, they all pointed to something deliberate, something orchestrated. But what? And by whom? The Belgian detective's mustache twitched as he tapped his pen against the page, his gray eyes narrowing in thought. Sudden sound, a muffled thud from the corridor, snapped him out of his reverie. He tilted his head, listening intently. Another sound followed, softer this time, like the rustle of fabric or a cautious footfall. Poirot rose silently, his small frame moving with surprising agility. He slipped on his velvet dressing gown, its deep burgundy hue blending into the shadows, and crept to the door. Opening it a crack, he peered into the dimly lit hallway, where gas lamps cast a sickly yellow glow. The corridor was empty, but the air felt charged, as if the manor itself were holding its breath. Poirot stepped out, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. He moved toward the source of the noise, which seemed to have come from the direction of the grand staircase. As he rounded a corner, he froze. Voices low, urgent, and unmistakably heated drifted up from the landing below. "You can't keep this up, Clara," a man's voice hissed, rough with emotion. "It's eating you alive." "I had no choice, Harrow," came the reply, sharp and trembling. It was the heiress, Clara Winthrop, her usually poised tone fraying at the edges. "You know what he was planning. You saw it." Poirot pressed himself against the wall, his heart quickening not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery. Clara and Captain Harrow, the war veteran, were arguing, and not discreetly. Their voices carried the weight of a shared secret, one that Poirot sensed was tied to the murder of Sir Reginald Blackthorne. He edged closer, careful to remain in the shadows. The landing opened into a small alcove, where a velvet curtain partially concealed a window overlooking the moors. Clara stood there, her auburn hair loose and glinting in the moonlight, her hands clenched into fists. Harrow towered over her, his broad shoulders tense, his scarred face taut with frustration. Neither noticed Poirot's silent approach. "You think I don't know what's at stake?" Harrow said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "But this isn't the way. You're digging yourself deeper, and I won't let you drown." Clara's eyes flashed. "Don't lecture me about drowning, Captain. You've been treading water since the war. We both have." She took a step closer, her voice softening but no less intense. "He was going to ruin everything. My family, my future, our future. I did what I had to." Poirot's mind raced. Our future? The phrase hung in the air, laden with implication. Clara and Harrow were connected, not just by circumstance, but by something deeper, something personal. A romance, perhaps, or a pact forged in desperation. But what had Clara done? And how did it relate to the locked study and Sir Reginald's death? Before Poirot could ponder further, a new sound interrupted a soft cough, deliberate and close. Both Clara and Harrow spun toward the alcove's entrance, where a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Father Ambrose, the priest, his black cassock blending into the darkness, his pale face almost ghostly in the dim light. His eyes, usually serene, were sharp with suspicion. "Miss Winthrop." "Captain Harrow," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge of reproach. It is late for such spirited discussions. Clara's hand flew to her chest, her composure faltering. Father, we were just— There is no need for explanations, Ambrose interrupted, raising a hand. But I would advise discretion. The walls of Blackthorn Manor have ears, and not all are as forgiving as mine. Harrow stepped forward, his fists clenched. What's that supposed to mean, Father? Eavesdropping on private conversations? Ambrose's lips pressed into a thin line. I was passing by, Captain. My room is just down the hall. But I wonder why such secrecy. And why now, with Sir Reginald's body barely cold? Poirot, still concealed, noted the priest's choice of words. Ambrose was fishing, testing the waters, but his tone suggested he knew more than he let on. The detective's curiosity deepened. What was Father Ambrose's role in this drama? Was he merely a bystander, or did his presence in the alcove at this hour hint at something more sinister? Clara's voice cut through the tension. We're all on edge, Father. It's been a terrible day. Let's not make it worse with accusations. Ambrose studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but I will pray for clarity for all of us. He turned to leave, his cassock rustling faintly, but paused at the threshold. Be careful, Miss Winthrop. Some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. As the priest disappeared into the corridor, Clara let out a shaky breath. Harrow reached for her arm, but she pulled away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I can't do this right now, she whispered, and fled toward her room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Harrow stood alone, his shoulders slumping. Poirot waited, motionless, until the veteran finally retreated in the opposite direction. Only then did the detective step forward, his mind alight with questions. The argument, the priest's interruption, it was a tableau rich with meaning, but the pieces were still scattered. He needed more. Returning to his room, Poirot's thoughts turned to Father Ambrose. The priest's cryptic warning and his presence in the alcove were no coincidence. Poirot resolved to confront him, but not yet. The night was still young, and secrets, like shadows, grew bolder in the dark. He settled at his desk, intending to jot down his observations, when a faint creak came from the hallway again. This time, it was closer too close. Poirot extinguished his candle and moved to the door, his senses heightened. Through the keyhole, he saw a flicker of movement, a figure gliding past, too swift to identify. But in the faint glow of the gas lamps, he caught the glint of something metallic in the figure's hand. A key? A weapon? He couldn't be sure. Poirot slipped into the corridor, following the figure's path. It led to the east wing, where the guest rooms gave way to older, less used parts of the manor. The air grew colder, the walls lined with faded tapestries depicting hunts and battles long forgotten. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, leading to a small chapel, a relic of the manor's medieval origins. Inside, a single candle burned on the altar, casting a warm glow over the stone walls and wooden pews. Father Ambrose knelt before the altar, his head bowed, a leather-bound Bible clutched in his hands. Poirot hesitated, then stepped inside, letting the door creak shut behind him. The priest's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. Monsieur Poirot, Ambrose said, rising slowly. You move like a ghost. What brings you to this sacred place at such an hour? Poirot smiled faintly, his mustache curling. The same thing that brings you, Father. The search for truth, or perhaps the need to unburden the soul. Ambrose's expression tightened, but he gestured to a pew. Sit, if you wish, though I suspect you are not here for prayer. Poirot remained standing, his hands clasped. Behind his back. You are correct, Father. I am here because I heard you in the alcove, and I saw the look in your eyes when you spoke to Miss Winthrop and Captain Harrow. You know something you have not shared. Ambrose's fingers tightened around the Bible. "You are direct, monsieur. But I am a priest. My duty is to God and to those who confide in me. I cannot betray that trust, even if it conceals a murderer." Poirot's voice was soft but piercing. "Sir Reginald is dead, father. A man was killed in this house. And you, I think, know more than you say. What did you overhear in that alcove? And why were you there?" The priest's gaze flickered to the candle, its flame wavering as if stirred by his thoughts. "You misunderstand, monsieur. I was not eavesdropping. I was troubled, unable to sleep. I came to the chapel to pray, and I heard voices. I did not intend to intrude." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming. "And yet you did. You spoke of burdens, of secrets. You warned Miss Winthrop. Why?" Ambrose hesitated, then set the Bible on the altar. "Very well. I will tell you what I can, but I beg you to respect the sanctity of confession. Earlier, today, before dinner, someone came to me. They spoke of a great wrong, a moral failing that weighed heavily on their heart. They did not confess to murder, but they spoke of fear, of desperation, of a plan that had gone too far." Poirot's heart quickened. Who was this person? Ambrose shook his head. "I cannot say. The seal of confession is absolute. But I will tell you this. What I heard made me fear for Sir Reginald's life. I tried to warn him, but he dismissed. He was not a man who listened to counsel." Poirot's mind raced. A confession, a warning ignored, a death in a locked room. The pieces were beginning to align, but the picture was still incomplete. And tonight, in the alcove, what did you hear? Ambrose's eyes darkened. "Enough to know that Miss Winthrop and Captain Harrow are entangled in something dangerous. They spoke of a fortune, a stolen fortune, and of Sir Reginald's role in it. I believe they know more about his death than they admit." Poirot nodded slowly. "A stolen fortune, you say. And where is this fortune now?" "I do not know," Ambrose admitted, "but I suspect it is why Sir Reginald was killed. He was not a good man, monsieur. His wealth was built on deceit, on betrayal. Perhaps someone sought justice." "Justice?" Poirot's voice sharpened. "Or revenge? The two are not the same, father." Ambrose looked away, his face troubled. "I cannot judge. That is for God and perhaps for you." Poirot studied the priest for a long moment, then stepped closer to the altar. His eyes fell on the Bible, its leather cover worn but meticulously cared for. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to it. Ambrose hesitated, then nodded. Poirot opened the Bible, flipping through its pages with care. Tucked between the Book of Psalms and the Proverbs was a small slip of paper, folded tightly. He unfolded it, revealing a series of numbers and letters scrawled in black ink. 31725. Midnight. G. Poirot's pulse quickened. "What is this, father?" Ambrose's face paled. I found it this evening, slipped under my door. I thought it was a mistake, a prank perhaps." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A prank? None, father. This is no prank. This is a message, a code. And I believe it holds the key to our next step." He tucked the paper into his pocket, his mind already working to decipher it. The numbers could be a date, a time, or something else entirely. The letter G, a name, a place, and midnight tonight, or another night. The possibilities were endless, but Poirot thrived on such challenges. "Thank you, father," he said, turning to leave. "You have been most helpful," Ambrose called after him. "Monsieur Poirot, be careful. There is darkness in this house, and it does not rest." Poirot paused at the door, his silhouette framed by the candlelight. "Darkness, father, cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. It is only a matter of time." He returned to his room, the coded message burning in his pocket. Sitting at his desk, he spread the paper before him, his candle relit. The numbers 3, 17, 25 could refer to a verse, a page, or even a location in the manor. The letter G nagged at him. Was it a person? The garden, perhaps, where he had yet to investigate? And midnight, had the meeting already occurred? Or was it still to come? He began testing the numbers against the Bible, turning to Psalm 3, verse 17. But the Psalms were short, and no such verse existed. He tried page numbers, then chapters, but nothing fit. Frustration crept in, but Poirot pushed it aside. The answer was there, waiting to be found. A sudden thought struck him. The manor's library Lady Eleanor had mentioned it housed rare manuscripts, some numbered for cataloguing. Could the numbers refer to a specific book? And G, could it stand for the garden where Sir Reginald was last seen alive by Captain Harrow? The pieces were aligning, but they were not yet complete. Poirot glanced at his pocket watch. It was nearly 2 in the morning, but sleep was a luxury he could not afford. He donned his coat and slipped into the corridor, heading for the library. The manor was silent now, the guests presumably asleep, but Poirot's instincts told him. The night was far from over. The library was a cavernous room, its shelves towering to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes and dusty tomes. A single lamp burned on a reading table, casting long shadows across the room. Poirot began searching the shelves, his fingers tracing the spines for any sign of the numbers March 17th, 25. He found nothing at first, but his persistence paid off when he noticed a small, unmarked book tucked behind a row of encyclopedias. Its spine bore a faint inscription, Catalogue 3, Section 17, Item 25. He pulled it out, his heart racing. The book was a ledger, its pages filled with financial records, Sir Reginald's accounts. Flipping through, Poirot found entries detailing vast sums transferred to an unnamed account, labeled only with the initial G. A. Fortune, indeed, and one that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. As he closed the ledger, a floorboard creaked behind him. He turned, but too late a shadow moved in the darkness, and a sharp pain exploded at the base of his skull. The world tilted, and Poirot fell, the ledger slipping from his hands. When he awoke, he was slumped in a chair, his head throbbing. The ledger was gone, and the library was empty. But on the table before him lay a single lavender sprig, its scent unmistakable. The same scent he had detected in the locked study. Poirot's lips curled into a grim smile. The game had just become more dangerous and more intriguing. Someone in Blackthorn Manor was watching him, testing him. But Hercule Poirot was not so easily deterred. The coded message, the stolen fortune, the lavender sprig, they were all threads in the same tapestry, and he would weave them together, no matter the cost. The night was not yet over, and neither was his hunt for the truth. Chapter 5. The Shadow in the Garden. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly beyond Blackthorn Manor, their mist-laden expanse cloaking the world in a shroud of mystery. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the manor's overgrown garden, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air was heavy with the scent of wet moss and fading roses, and a faint chill whispered through the gnarled branches overhead. Dawn had barely broken, the sky a bruised purple, yet Poirot's mind was sharp, his gray cells humming with purpose. The coded message he'd deciphered in Father Ambrose's Bible, a cryptic scrawl of numbers and letters, had pointed to this very spot, the garden, at the hour when night surrendered to day. A rendezvous, it seemed, had taken place here, and Poirot intended to uncover its secrets. The garden was a labyrinth of neglect. Ivy-strangled stone statues, their faces weathered into ghostly anonymity. Hedges, once manicured, sprawled wild, their shadows twisting in the half-light. Poirot's eyes scanned the ground, noting the uneven flagstones and the patches of earth where recent rain had left the soil soft and impressionable. His gloved hand adjusted his hat as he moved forward, his steps deliberate, his cane tapping lightly against the path. The message had been precise. By the sundial, when the lark rises. The sundial stood at the garden's heart, its bronze, face tarnished, its gnomon casting a faint shadow despite the dim light. Poirot paused, his mustache twitching as he inhaled deeply. There was something else in the air, a faint trace of lavender, the same scent he'd noted in the locked study where Sir Reginald's body had been found. He crouched, his knees protesting, and examined the earth near the sundial. The soil was disturbed, a faint arc of footprints pressed into the mud. They were deep at the heel, suggesting haste or weight, and the pattern was a regular one set larger, perhaps a man's, another, smaller, lighter. A struggle? A meeting gone awry? Poirot's fingers traced the air above the prints, careful not to disturb them. Mon Dieu, he murmured. The garden. It speaks, but its voice is sly. A rustle in the bush made him straighten. His hand tightened on his cane, though his expression remained serene. "Who is there?" he called, his voice carrying a quiet authority. Silence answered, broken only by the distant cry of a moorland bird. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping. The shadows. He stepped toward the sound, his movements precise, and parted the foliage with his cane. There, caught on a thorn, was a scrap of fabric, a torn glove, its leather fine but frayed at the edges. He plucked it free, holding it to the light. The glove was black, with delicate stitching, and bore a faint monogram, C.L. Poirot's lips. Curved slightly. A clue, n'est-ce pas? But a clue that accuses, or a clue that deceives? He tucked the glove into his pocket and continued his exploration, following the footprints to a clearing where the grass was flattened, as if two figures had stood close, perhaps in confrontation. The lavender scent was stronger here, mingled with something earthier, tobacco, perhaps, or the residue of a pipe. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the scent to the study, to the shattered teacup, to the misplaced book. The garden was no mere backdrop. It was a stage where secrets had been enacted. As he pondered, a figure emerged from the mist. Captain Harrow, the war veteran, his broad shoulders hunched against the morning chill. His face, scarred and weathered, was set in a scowl, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as they met Poirot's. "Monsieur Poirot," he said gruffly, "you're up early. Or do Belgians not sleep?" Poirot smiled, unruffled. "Sleep, Captain, is for those without mysteries to unravel. You, I see, are also drawn to this garden. May I ask why?" Harrow shifted, his boots scuffing the earth. "Couldn't sleep? Thought I'd clear my head. This place, it's got a way of getting under your skin." His gaze darted to the sundial, then away. "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone light but probing. "And did you, perhaps, visit this garden 2 nights ago, when Sir Reginald still breathed?" Harrow's jaw tightened. "What are you getting at, Poirot?" Poirot stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Harrow's. "The footprints, Captain. They are fresh, and one set matches the size of your boots. And this," he produced the glove, holding it delicately between his fingers. "This was found here, where you stand. See, does it mean anything to you?" Harrow's face darkened, but he didn't flinch. "You're barking up the wrong tree. Yes, I was here that night. Met Reginald by the sundial. He wanted to talk something about old debts. But I left him alive. I swear it. That glove isn't mine." Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Old debts, you say? And yet the garden tells a story of struggle. The earth is torn, the grass flattened. And this glove, its leather is fine, not the sort a soldier might wear, but perhaps one known to a man of your acquaintance. Harrow's hands clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot pressed on, his voice soft but relentless. You are a man of honor, Captain, yet your silence protects someone. Or something. Tell me, what did Sir Reginald say to you that night? Harrow hesitated, then exhaled sharply. He was drunk, rambling about betrayals. Said he had dirt on all of us, me, Clara, the judge, even that priest. Wanted me to pay to keep my name clean. I told him to go to hell and walked away. That's all. Poirot nodded as if satisfied, but his mind was already weaving connections. Clara, the young heiress whose initials matched the glove's monogram. The judge, whose past rulings haunted the manor. The priest, whose silence hid a confession. And now Harrow, admitting to a meeting but denying murder. The garden was a nexus, a place where truths collided. Come, Poirot said, gesturing toward the manor. We return to the house. But first, I must ask you to remain silent about our conversation. The killer, Captain, is watching, and I intend to see them stumble. Harrow nodded curtly and followed, his boots heavy on the path. Poirot's mind, however, lingered on the glove. Its leather was soft, expensive, and the monogram suggested Clara Langley, the heiress. Yet something nagged at him, the lavender scent, the same as in the study. Was Clara careless enough to leave such a clue, or was the glove a deliberate misdirection? He resolved to test his theory at breakfast, where the guests would gather, their faces betraying what their words concealed. The dining room was a study in contrasts, the opulence of crystal chandeliers clashing with the tension that hung over the table. Lady Eleanor presided, her face pale but composed, her eyes darting to each guest as if weighing their secrets. Clara sat opposite, her hands fidgeting with a napkin, her auburn hair catching the morning light. The judge, Sir Harold, sipped his tea with forced calm, while Father Ambrose murmured a quiet prayer, his fingers tracing the edge of his Bible. Harrow, now seated, stared at his plate, avoiding Poirot's gaze. Poirot entered last, his presence commanding attention. He set the torn glove on the table, its monogram visible to all. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice smooth as velvet. This was found in the garden, near the sundial, where a meeting took place the night Sir Reginald died. See L initials that point to Mademoiselle Clara, perhaps? Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's not mine. I've never worn gloves like that. I swear it. Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Then how did it come to be in my garden, Clara? You were close to my brother. Perhaps too close? Enough. The judge interjected, his voice stern. This is speculation, Poirot. You've no proof Clara was there. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Proof, Sir Harold, is not always immediate, but it is inevitable. The glove's fabric is kid leather, dyed black, with stitching unique to a London atelier. Mademoiselle Clara, do you own such gloves? Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. No, I don't. I prefer silk. Ask my maid, she'll tell you. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. And yet, the scent of lavender clings to this glove, as it did to the study. Curious, n'est-ce pas? Who among you favors such a fragrance? A heavy silence fell. Father Ambrose cleared his throat. Lavender is common, Monsieur Poirot. Many use it perfumes, soaps. Indeed, Poirot said, his eyes locking. On to the priests. But not all leave gloves in gardens where murders are planned. I propose a small experiment. Tonight we shall reconvene, and I shall reveal more. Until then, I ask you to reflect on your secrets. The truth, it has a way of blooming, like a flower in this very garden. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on Clara. Her distress seemed genuine, yet her initials were no coincidence. He approached her quietly, his voice low. "Mademoiselle, if you know more than you say, now is the time to speak. The garden holds many shadows, but none darker than a lie." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't there, Monsieur Poirot, but I heard Reginald arguing that night from my window. He was angry, shouting about money. I couldn't see who he was with, but it wasn't me." Poirot studied her, then nodded. "Very well. But know this, the killer is among us, and they will not escape Hercule Poirot." The rest of the day passed in a haze of suspicion. Poirot returned to the garden, sketching the footprints in a small notebook, noting their angles and depths. The larger set, likely Harrow's, was consistent with his story. He had stood, argued, and left, but the smaller set intrigued him. They were shallow, almost delicate, yet purposeful. A woman, perhaps, or a man with a light step. He followed them to a stone bench, where a faint indentation suggested someone had sat, perhaps waiting. Nearby, he found a cigarette butt, its tip stained with a faint trace of lipstick. Not Clara's shade, he noted she favored coral, not crimson dot by evening. Poirot had formed a plan. He gathered the guests in the library, where a fire crackled, casting shadows on the oak-paneled walls. He held the glove aloft, his voice steady. "This glove is a lie," he declared. "It was placed to mislead, to point to Mademoiselle Clara. But the true clue is the lavender and the cigarette. Someone here smokes, and someone here knows the garden secrets." Lady Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for her tea. "You're accusing us all, Poirot." "It's absurd." "Not all, madame," Poirot said. "Only one. And tonight I shall set a trap. At midnight, return to the garden by the sundial. Bring nothing but your honesty. The killer will reveal themselves, for they cannot resist the bait." The guests exchanged glances, their faces a mosaic of fear and defiance. Poirot smiled inwardly. The trap was simple. He had planted a rumor, whispered to the butler, that a witness had seen the killer in the garden. If the guilty party believed their secret was at risk, they would act perhaps to retrieve a hidden clue, perhaps to silence an imagined threat. Poirot would be watching, his gray cells poised to catch the shadow that moved in the dark dot as midnight approached. Poirot hid behind a yew hedge, his breath visible in the cold air. The garden was silent, save for the rustle of leaves. Then a figure appeared, moving swiftly toward the sundial. Not Clara, not Harrow, but Father Ambrose, his cassock brushing the ground. He knelt, his hands digging in the earth, searching. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the night. "Father Ambrose, what do you seek? A clue you left behind?" The priest froze, his face pale. I lost something, a prayer book." "It's nothing, Monsieur Poirot." "Nothing?" Poirot said, stepping closer. "Then why dig in the very spot where the footprints converge? Speak, Father, or the truth will speak for you." Ambrose rose, his hands trembling. "I heard something that night. A shot, a cry. I came to the garden, saw Reginald fall. I didn't act. I was afraid." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. "And what did you see, Father? A figure? A face?" Ambrose shook his head. "Only shadows. But I found this." He produced a small key, its surface glinting in the moonlight. "It was near the sundial. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I feared it would implicate someone innocent." Poirot took the key, his mind racing. A key, perhaps to the hidden passage he suspected, led to the study. The priest's story was incomplete, but it was a thread in the tapestry. "Return to the manor, Father," Poirot said, "and say nothing. The trap is not yet sprung." As Ambrose retreated, Poirot remained, his eyes scanning the garden. The key, the glove, the footprints, They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was not yet clear. The lavender scent lingered in his mind, a thread connecting the garden to the murder. Someone had orchestrated this scene, and Poirot was determined to unmask them. The chapter closed with him standing alone, the mist curling around him, a solitary figure in a garden of secrets, poised to unravel the truth. Chapter 6. The judge's burden. The air in Blackthorn Manor hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clung to the walls like damp moss. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded neatly in his lap, his mustache impeccably trimmed, a silent sentinel of order amidst the chaos of secrets. The morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug, where the guests had gathered after a restless night. Each face bore the strain of Sir Reginald's murder, their eyes darting, seeking. The betrayer among them. Poirot's gaze settled on Sir Henry Caldwell, the retired judge, whose stern countenance had softened into something brittle, like porcelain on the verge of cracking. The judge sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, his fingers gripping the armrests as though anchoring himself to a fading sense of authority. His white hair, once a symbol of wisdom, now seemed a crown of burdens, and his deep-set eyes avoided Poirot's scrutiny. The detective had sensed, from the moment he arrived, that Caldwell carried a weight heavier than the others, a weight that might crack the foundation of this mystery. Monsieur Caldwell, Poirot began, his voice soft yet piercing, you have been most reticent about your connection to Sir Reginald. Yet, I suspect there is a story, none? One that troubles you deeply. The judge's jaw tightened, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Clara, the young heiress, glanced up from her teacup, her delicate features tense with curiosity. Captain Harrow, the war veteran, leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped tightly, while Father Ambrose, the priest, stared at the floor, his lips moving in silent prayer. Lady Eleanor, poised at the head of the room, watched with an unreadable expression, her fingers tracing the edge of a silver locket. I have nothing to hide, Caldwell said, his voice gravelly, but a tremor betrayed him. Reginald was a business associate, nothing more. We had our disagreements, as men of ambition often do. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. Disagreements, but perhaps more than that. You were a judge, a man of justice, yet I sense a shadow upon your conscience. Tell me, what was the nature of your dealings with Sir Reginald? The judge's face paled, and for a moment the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum slicing through the silence. Poirot waited, his patience a weapon honed by years of unraveling human hearts. It was long ago, Caldwell began, his voice barely above a whisper. A case, one of many I presided over. Reginald's company, Blackthorn Enterprises, was embroiled in a lawsuit. Fraud, they claimed, though the details were murky. I ruled against him, and his business suffered greatly. He never forgave me. Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on his knee. And this ruling, was it just? Caldwell's eyes flickered, a storm brewing within them. Justice is not always clean, Monsieur Poirot. I made the best decision I could with the evidence before me. The detective's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. And yet you confronted Sir Reginald the night of his death, did you not? In the study, before the fatal shot was fired? A gasp escaped Clara, and Captain Harrow's hand tightened into a fist. Father Ambrose's prayers grew louder, a murmured chant that grated on the nerves. Lady Eleanor's locket snapped shut. With a click, her composure unbroken, but her eyes sharp. How did you? Caldwell stopped himself, his shoulders sagging. Yes, I spoke with him. He was drunk, ranting about old grudges. I told him to let it go, that the past was buried. He laughed in my face, Said I'd pay for what I'd done. But I swear I left him alive. Poirot's gaze did not waver. And what, precisely, did he mean by what you'd done? The judge hesitated, his hands trembling now. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the walls themselves were closing in to hear his confession. Poirot rose from his chair, his small frame commanding the space, and paced slowly before the fireplace, where embers glowed faintly. "Permit me to hypothesize," Poirot said, his voice like a scalpel, cutting through the tension. "You, a man of the law, were not always as impartial as your title suggests. There was a moment, perhaps, when justice was persuaded. A bribe, perhaps? A favor exchanged for a ruling that tipped the scales?" The judge's face crumpled, and for the first time he looked not like a pillar of authority, but a man stripped bare. "It was one mistake," he whispered, his voice breaking. "One moment of weakness. Reginald offered me money to sway the case in his favor, to protect his company from ruin. I refused at first, but my daughter was ill, the treatments costly. I took the money, and I buried the truth." Clara's teacup clattered to the floor, shattering into fragments. "You took a bribe?" she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You, who preached integrity to us all?" Caldwell's head bowed, his hands covering his face. "I regretted it every day. When the case turned against Reginald years later, he blamed me, said I'd betrayed him by not doing enough. He threatened to expose me, to ruin my name." Poirot stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "And so you went to the study to plead with him, to silence his threats. But something went wrong, oui?" "I begged him to let it go," Caldwell said, his voice raw. "He mocked me, called me a hypocrite. I left him there, alive, I swear it. I couldn't bear to stay." The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Poirot turned to the others, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Monsieur Caldwell, for your candor. But there is more to this tale, I think. A safe, hidden in the study, contains answers we have yet to uncover." Lady Eleanor rose, her silk gown rustling. "A safe?" she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of alarm. "What do you mean, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly, a gesture that held no warmth. "During my examination of the study, I noticed a panel behind the bookshelf, slightly ajar. A safe, locked with a combination, lies within. I suspect it holds documents that will illuminate the truth of Sir Reginald's death." The guests exchanged glances, each face a mask of fear or calculation. Captain Harrow's jaw clenched, and Father Ambrose's prayers ceased abruptly. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, her locket gleaming in the morning light. "Then let us open it," Lady Eleanor said, her tone commanding. "If it holds the truth, we should know it." Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, madame, but the combination eludes us for now. I have deciphered part of it, a sequence of numbers etched faintly on the safe's dial. 379. 3 digits remain, and I believe they are tied to Sir Reginald's past. We shall reconvene this evening, when I have had time to reflect." The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast manor, each retreating to their private fears. Poirot remained by the fireplace, his mind a labyrinth of clues and motives. The judge's confession had cracked open a door, but the truth lay deeper, hidden in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor. The day passed in a haze of whispers and sidelong glances. Poirot spent the afternoon in the study, his gloved hands tracing the edges of the hidden panel. The safe was an old model, its brass dial worn but functional. The numbers 379 had been scratched into the metal, a clue left by someone perhaps. Reginald himself. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the fragments of the case. The shattered teacup, the scent of lavender, the misplaced book. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. As evening approached, Poirot summoned the butler, Mr. Grayson, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed to see too much and say too little. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said, standing before the safe, "you served Sir Reginald for many years. Did he ever speak of this safe or its contents?" Grayson's expression remained impassive. "He was a private man, sir. He kept his business to himself." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "And yet you were privy to much, were you not? The comings and goings of the manor, the secrets whispered in its halls. Tell me, did Sir Reginald ever mention a sequence of numbers? Perhaps a date or a code?" The butler hesitated, his fingers twitching at his side. "Once, sir, he mentioned a date his mother's birthday. I believe it was the 15th of June, 1872. Poirot's mustache quivered with satisfaction. "Merci, Monsieur Grayson. That will be all." Alone again, Poirot turned to the safe, his fingers hovering over the dial. He entered 379 and paused, calculating. If the date was indeed the 15th of June, 72, it might complete the combination. He spun the dial. The 15th of June, 72. A soft click echoed in the silent study, and the safe door swung open. Inside lay a stack of documents, yellowed with age, but meticulously organized. Poirot's eyes scanned the topmost page. A contract signed by Sir Reginald and Sir Henry Caldwell, detailing a payment of £10,000 for services rendered during the lawsuit. Below it, a ledger listed transactions, each entry a damning record of fraud, with Caldwell's name recurring like a refrain. Poirot's heart quickened, not with surprise, but with a thrill of confirmation. The judge's bribe was no mere rumor. It was documented, a secret Reginald had wielded like a blade. But there was more. A letter, folded neatly, addressed to Lady Eleanor. Poirot unfolded it, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Eleanor, my dear sister, if you read this, I am likely dead. The judge is not the only one with blood on his hands. Look to the priest, whose silence hides a greater sin. The truth lies where? The lavender grows." Poirot's mind raced. The scent of lavender in the study, the misplaced book, a botanical guide, opened to a page on lavender fields. The letter suggested a deeper conspiracy, one that entangled Father Ambrose, and perhaps Lady Eleanor herself. But the safe held one final item, a small, ornate key, its purpose unclear. As night fell, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room once more. The fire roared, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He held the documents aloft, his voice steady but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the safe has yielded its secrets. Sir Henry, your past is laid bare. Bribe taken, a career tainted. But this is not the end of the story. Sir Reginald's death was no act of impulse. It was a reckoning, planned with care. The question remains, who among you held the gun?" Caldwell's face was ashen, his hands trembling. "I told you, I didn't kill him. I couldn't." Poirot's eyes flicked to Father Ambrose, whose hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles white. "And you, Father, what do you know of lavender, or of the sins you have chosen to conceal?" The priest's eyes widened, but he said nothing. Lady Eleanor's locket clicked open, then shut, her composure faltering for the first time. Clara and Captain Harrow exchanged a glance, their alliance unspoken but evident. Poirot lowered the documents, his voice softening. "The combination is solved, but the mystery deepens. Tonight, I shall reflect on these new truths. Tomorrow, we shall uncover the killer's hand." The chapter closed with the guests retiring, their footsteps heavy with dread. Poirot stood alone, the key in his hand, its weight a promise of revelations yet to come. The judge's burden had been laid bare, but the manor's secrets whispered. Still, hidden in the scent of lavender and the silence of a priest. Chapter 7. The heiress's secret. The air in Blackthorn Manor seemed to thicken with each passing hour, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next revelation to crack open the fragile veneer of civility among the guests. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his lap, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the late hour. The room was a cavern of shadows, its towering bookshelves looming like silent sentinels, their leather-bound tomes absorbing the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. A single lamp cast a warm, amber glow over the table where Poirot had spread out his notes, scribbled observations, timelines, and a sketch of the locked study where Sir Reginald Blackthorn had met his end. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed, softly, marking the hour as just past 11. The manor was quiet now, the guests having retired to their rooms after another tense dinner, where whispers and sidelong glances had replaced conversation. Yet Poirot's mind was far from rest. Case was a tapestry of motives, each thread knotted with secrets, and tonight he intended to tug at one in particular, Clara Langley, the young heiress whose delicate features and poised demeanor masked a storm of emotion. He had glimpsed in her eyes. Clara had been the first to catch his attention, not because of her wealth or her beauty, though both were undeniable, but because of the way she carried herself, like a bird poised to flee at the slightest disturbance. Her story of a broken engagement with Sir Reginald had been delivered with practiced calm, but Poirot had noted the tremor in her voice, the way her fingers twisted the lace of her handkerchief when she spoke of him. There was more to her tale, he was certain, and tonight he would uncover it. He rose from his chair, adjusting his waistcoat, and made his way to the second floor, where Clara's room overlooked the manor's sprawling, moonlit garden. The corridor was dimly lit, the gas lamps flickering, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets that clung to the shadows. Poirot knocked softly on Clara's door, his knuckles barely grazing the polished wood. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps, and the door creaked open to reveal Clara, still dressed in her evening gown, a pale blue silk that shimmered like moonlight on water. Her auburn hair was unpinned, cascading over her shoulders, and her green eyes widened at the sight of him. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "It's late. Is something wrong?" "None, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But I must speak with you. It is a matter of some urgency, and I believe you will find it illuminating to share what weighs upon your heart." Clara hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorframe. For a moment, Poirot thought she might refuse, but then she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Very well," she said, her voice steadying. "Come in." The room was elegantly appointed, with a four-poster bed draped in velvet, a writing desk cluttered with papers, and a window that framed the garden's ghostly silhouettes. A single candle burned on the bedside table, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Clara closed the door and turned to face him, her arms crossed as if to shield herself from his scrutiny. "What do you want to know, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I've told you everything about Reginald. Our engagement ended years ago. There's nothing more to say." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with that quiet intensity that made even the most resolute falter. "Mademoiselle Langley, the heart does not so easily forget what the lips refuse to speak. I have observed you, and I see a woman who carries a burden far heavier than a broken engagement. There is something you protect, perhaps not for yourself, but for someone you love. Will you not share it with Hercule Poirot, who seeks only the truth?" Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She turned away, moving to the window where she gazed out at the garden, its roses and ivy bathed in silver light. The silence stretched, taut as a violin string, and Poirot waited, knowing that sometimes silence was the key to unlocking a confession. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're right, Monsieur Poirot. There is more. But it's not what you think. It's not about revenge or hatred. It's about shame and love." Poirot's expression softened, but he remained silent, giving her the space to continue. Clara's shoulders slumped, and she turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Reginald wasn't just my fiancé," she said. "He was everything to me once. I was young, barely 19, when we met. He was charming, worldly, and I thought he loved me. But he didn't, not really. He wanted my family's money, our name. When I found out, I broke it off, but he wouldn't let go. He threatened to ruin us." "Ruin you?" Poirot prompted, his voice gentle but probing. "How so, mademoiselle?" Clara took a shaky breath, her hands clenching into fists. "He had letters I wrote to someone else, someone I loved after him, someone who wasn't part of his world, someone he would have destroyed if he knew. Reginald found out and kept those letters, threatening to publish them to drag my family's name through the mud. I couldn't let that happen." Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of her story. "These letters," he said carefully, "they were not written to Sir Reginald?" "No," Clara said, her voice breaking. "They were to someone else, someone I still care for, even now. I stole the letters back from Reginald's study the night he died. I had to. If they'd been found, it would have ruined everything, my family, my future, and him." "Him?" Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "And who, mademoiselle? Is this him?" Clara hesitated, her gaze darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst through. Then, with a resolve that seemed to steel her spine, she crossed the room to her writing desk and opened a small locked drawer. From it she withdrew a silver locket, its surface engraved with delicate vines. She opened it, revealing a tiny photograph of a man in a military uniform, his face rugged but kind, with eyes that held a quiet strength. "Captain Harrow," Poirot said softly, recognizing the war veteran from among the guests. "The man you argued with in the garden last night." Clara's eyes widened. "You saw that?" "Non, mademoiselle. I did not see, but I heard. The walls of Blackthorn Manor are not so thick as one might think, and voices carry in the night. You and Captain Harrow share a history, do you not?" Clara nodded, clutching the locket to her chest. "We met 2 years ago, after my engagement to Reginald ended. David Captain Harrow was stationed near our estate in Kent. He was kind, brave, nothing like Reginald. We fell in love, but my family would never approve. He's not of our class, you see. And when Reginald found out, he used it against me. He had my letters to David, stolen from my room by a servant he'd bribed. He said he'd expose us, ruin David's career, and shame my family unless I paid him. Blackmail, Poirot murmured, his voice laced with distaste. A most cowardly weapon. "And so you took the letters back to protect Captain Harrow and your family's honor?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice firm now. "I went to the study that night before dinner. I knew where Reginald kept his private papers. I found the letters in a locked box under his desk. I took them and left. I swear, Monsieur Poirot, he was alive when I left him." Poirot studied her, his gray eyes searching her face for any hint of deception. But all he saw was a young woman caught in a web of fear and loyalty, her heart torn between duty and love. "Mademoiselle," he said, "you have been most candid, and for that I commend you. But there is one thing I must know. Did you see anything, hear anything, that might point to who was with Sir Reginald after you left?" Clara frowned, her brow furrowing as she thought back. I'm not sure. It was so quick. I was terrified of being caught. But there was a sound, just as I was leaving the study. A creak, like a floorboard, in the hall outside. I thought it was nothing, but now, maybe someone was there. Poirot nodded, his mind already turning over this new piece of the puzzle. A creak in the hall. A small detail, but in Poirot's world, no detail was too small. "Merci, mademoiselle," he said, rising from his chair. "You have given me much to consider. I ask only that you keep this locket safe, and trust that Hercule Poirot will see justice done." Clara clutched the locket tighter, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "You won't tell anyone, will you, about David?" Poirot's lips curved into a small, reassuring smile. "The secrets of the heart are safe with Poirot, mademoiselle. But the truth of this murder that I must uncover." As he left her room, the corridor seemed colder, the shadows deeper. Poirot's mind was alight with possibilities. Clara's confession had confirmed his suspicions of a deeper motive tied to love and shame, but it also raised new questions. Who had been in the hall outside the study? And what role did Captain Harrow play in this tangled drama? The locket was a clue, a tangible link between Clara and the veteran, but it was the creak of that floorboard that intrigued him most. Someone had been watching, waiting, perhaps planning. He descended the grand staircase, his polished shoes silent, on the thick carpet, and made his way to the study where Sir Reginald's body had been found. The room was as he'd left it, the police having cordoned it off after their initial investigation. Poirot slipped under the tape, his eyes scanning the familiar scene. The heavy oak desk, the shattered teacup, the misplaced book. But now he focused on the door, the threshold where Clara had heard that telltale creak. He knelt, examining the floorboards with care. The wood was old, polished by years of use, but one board near the door was slightly raised, its edge worn smooth. Poirot pressed it gently, and it gave a soft, unmistakable creak. His lips twitched in satisfaction. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The house itself speaks to Poirot." He straightened, his mind racing. The creak suggested someone had been close to the study when Clara was inside, someone who might have seen her leave or entered after her. The timeline was tightening, and Poirot felt the familiar thrill of the chase. But he needed more. He needed to test his suspicions, to draw the truth from the shadows. Returning to his room, Poirot sat at the small writing desk and began to sketch a new timeline, incorporating Clara's confession. She had entered the study before dinner, around 7 o'clock, and left shortly after. Dinner had been served at 8, and the scream that alerted the guests to Reginald's death had come just after 9. That left a window of roughly 2 hours during which the murder could have occurred. The creak in the hall, the hidden passage he suspected from his earlier findings, and now Clara's stolen letters, all pointed to a sequence of events that was anything but random. The next morning, Poirot resolved to confront Captain Harrow. The veteran's heated argument with Clara in the garden, overheard the previous night, suggested a man with secrets of his own. If Clara was protecting him, as Poirot suspected, then Harrow might hold the key to the next piece of the puzzle dot at breakfast. The dining room was a study in tension. The guests sat in uneasy silence, their plates barely touched. Lady Eleanor, regal in black morning silk, presided at the head of the table, her eyes distant. The judge, Sir Harold Grayson, sipped his coffee with a scowl, while Father Ambrose, the priest, murmured a quiet prayer over his toast. Captain Harrow sat opposite Clara, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on his plate. Poirot entered, his presence commanding attention despite his diminutive stature. "Bon matin, mes amis," he said brightly, though his eyes were sharp as they scanned the room. "I trust you all slept well, despite the disturbances of the night." Lady Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Disturbances, Monsieur Poirot?" Do you mean the murder, or something else? Poirot smiled, taking his seat. The murder, Bean, sir, but also the little noises of an old house. Creaks, whispers, secrets that travel through the walls. They are most revealing, non? The judge grunted, setting down his cup. Get to the point, Poirot. Have you found something? Or are you just fishing? Poirot's smile widened, but his tone was firm. Patience, Sir Harold. The truth is like a fine wine. It requires time to breathe. But I assure you, Hercule Poirot is close to uncorking it. His gaze settled on Captain Harrow, who shifted uncomfortably. Captain, Poirot said, his voice deceptively casual, I wonder if you might indulge me with a private word after breakfast. There is a matter of sentiment I wish to discuss. Harrow's eyes flicked to Clara, then back to Poirot. Sentiment? He said, his voice gruff. I'm not sure I follow. You will, mon ami, Poirot said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will. As breakfast concluded, Poirot led Harrow to the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants and the faint hum of bees from the garden beyond. The morning light streamed through the panes, casting dappled shadows across the tiled floor. Harrow stood stiffly, his hands clasped behind his back, his military bearing at odds with the nervous twitch in his jaw. Captain Harrow, Poirot began, pacing slowly. You are a man of honor, are you not? A man who has faced death on the battlefield, who knows the weight of loyalty and sacrifice. Harrow nodded, his expression wary. I like to think so. Then let us speak as men of honor, Poirot said, stopping to face him. You care for Mademoiselle Langley, do you not? And she for you. This is no secret to Poirot, who sees the language of the heart in every glance, every gesture. Harrow's face darkened, but he didn't deny it. What's this about, Poirot? Clara's got nothing to do with Reginald's death. Perhaps not directly, Poirot said, his voice softening. But she has risked much to protect you. She has told me of the letters, of Sir Reginald's blackmail. She stole them to shield you, to preserve your honor and her family's name. But I must know, Captain, what did you do that night? Where were you when Sir Reginald was killed? Harrow's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of fear in them. I was in my room, getting ready for dinner. I didn't see Reginald after tea. I've told you this. And yet, Poirot said, raising a finger, there is the matter of the garden. You were seen there, arguing with Mademoiselle Langley. And I have reason to believe someone was near the study when she took the letters. Was it you, Captain? Did you follow her, perhaps to protect her, or to confront Sir Reginald yourself? Harrow's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained steady. I didn't follow her. I didn't know she was in the study. Yes, we argued in the garden, but it was about us, our future. Nothing to do with Reginald. Poirot tilted, his head studying him. And yet, Captain, you carry a weight. I see it in your eyes. There is something you have not told me. Perhaps it is not about the murder, but it is about Sir Reginald. What is it you hide? For a moment, Harrow said nothing, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the glass. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he spoke. Reginald wasn't just a coward in the war, Poirot. He was a traitor. He sold information to the enemy, got good men killed. I saw it, but I couldn't prove it. When I came here, I wanted to confront him, to make him admit it. But I didn't kill him. I swear it. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind cataloguing this. New information. A traitor, he murmured. This is a grave accusation, Captain, and it gives you a motive, does it not? To silence a man who shamed you and your comrades. I didn't kill him, Harrow repeated, his voice low but fierce. I wanted to. God help me, but I didn't. Very well, Poirot said, his tone measured. I believe you speak the truth, Captain. But I must warn you secrets have a way of unraveling, and Hercule Poirot will unravel them all. As he left the conservatory, Poirot felt a surge of clarity. Clara's confession and Harrow's revelation had tightened the web of motives, but the creak in the hall remained the key. Someone else had been there, someone who had seen Clara leave or entered the study after her. The hidden passage, the blood-stained handkerchief he would later find, and now this new accusation of treason, all pointed to a killer whose motives were as tangled as the ivy in Blackthorn's garden. Back in his room, Poirot sat once more at his desk, adding Harrow's story to his notes. The timeline was clearer now, but the killer's identity remained elusive. Clara had vowed to help him, and he sensed she would be a valuable ally. Her love for Harrow, her fear of exposure, and her courage in stealing the letters made her a figure of both vulnerability and strength. Poirot admired that, but he also knew that love could blind even the sharpest mind. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and let his thoughts drift through the little gray cells, the creak in the hall, the locket, the traitor. The pieces were there, waiting to be assembled, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, would assemble them. The chapter ended with a quiet resolve settling over him. Clara's secret was safe, for now, but the truth of Sir Reginald's death was closer than ever. The Manor's shadows held one more revelation, and Poirot was determined to bring it into the light. Chapter 8. A veteran's tale. The wind howled outside Blackthorn Manor, rattling the ancient windows as if the moors themselves were whispering secrets. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the oak-paneled walls. Hercule Poirot sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded over his walking stick, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the late hour. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across. The faces of the guests, each one a study in guarded unease. The murder of Sir Reginald Blackthorn, found dead in his locked study, had unraveled the fragile civility of the weekend gathering, and Poirot's sharp eyes missed nothing. Captain James Harrow, the war veteran, sat apart from the others, his broad shoulders hunched as he stared into the flames. His face, weathered by years of conflict, bore the scars of battles both external and internal, a jagged line across his left cheek, a hardness in his gray eyes that spoke of things seen and never forgotten. Poirot had observed him closely since their arrival, noting the way Harrow's hands trembled slightly when Sir Reginald's name was mentioned, the way his jaw tightened at certain questions. There was a story there, one Poirot intended to uncover. The other guests were scattered about the room, their conversations stilted. Clara, the young heiress, toyed nervously with her locket, her delicate features pale under the weight of her secrets. The retired judge, Sir Harold Grayson, sipped his brandy with a forced air of authority, though his eyes darted to the door as if expecting an ambush. Father Ambrose, the secretive priest, sat in a shadowed corner, his fingers tracing the edge of his Bible, his lips moving in silent prayer, or perhaps something less holy. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, their hostess, had retired early, claiming a headache, but Poirot suspected she was avoiding his scrutiny. "Captain Harrow," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the room's tension like a well-aimed dart. "Perhaps you would indulge me with a moment of your time. A walk, perhaps, to clear the mind?" Harrow's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "A walk? At this hour? It's near midnight, Monsieur Poirot." "Oui, but the night, it is often when truths come to light, non?" Poirot's tone was light, almost playful, but his gaze was unyielding. "The air, it is crisp, and the mind, it is sharp. Will you join me?" The other guests exchanged glances, their curiosity palpable. Harrow hesitated, then stood, his movements stiff but deliberate. "Fine. Let's get this over with." They stepped into the chilly corridor. The manor's silence, broken only by the creak of floorboards and the distant moan of the wind. Poirot led the way to the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and heavy furniture. He closed the door behind them, ensuring privacy, and gestured for Harrow to sit. The captain remained standing, his arms crossed, his posture radiating defiance. "You have questions, I presume," Harrow said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Everyone does. So, what is it? You think I killed Reginald?" Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "Mon ami, I do not accuse without evidence, but I observe. And what I observe in you, Captain Harrow, is a man carrying a burden, a heavy one. Perhaps you will share it with Hercule Poirot, and together we may lighten it." Harrow's laugh was bitter, like the crack of a breaking branch. "Lighten it? You think words can undo the past? You don't know what you are asking." "Then tell me," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. "Tell me of the past, of Sir Reginald, of the war." Harrow's defiance wavered, his eyes flickering with something raw pain, perhaps, or rage. He turned away, pacing to the window, where the moonlight painted the moors in silver and shadow. For a long moment he said nothing, and Poirot waited, patient as a spider in its web. It was 1917. Harrow began at last, his voice distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a trench. "The Somme, mud, blood, and madness. I was a captain, leading a company of men who trusted me to keep them alive. Reginald Blackthorne was one of them, a lieutenant. Young, arrogant, born with a silver spoon and a coward's heart." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "A coward, you say? This is a strong word, Captain. What did he do to earn it?" Harrow's hands clenched into fists, the knuckles white. "We were ordered to hold a position, a crumbling trench, barely defensible. The Germans were shelling us day and night. My men were exhausted, starving, half dead already. Reginald was my second in command. I trusted him to relay orders, to keep the men steady. But when the shells came too close, when the enemy broke through, he paused, his breath ragged. He ran." Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he said nothing, letting the silence draw Harrow's story out like a thread. "He abandoned his post," Harrow continued, his voice thick with disgust. "Left his men to die. I found him later, hiding in a bombed-out farmhouse, shaking like a leaf. He begged me not to report him, said his family's name, their influence, would ruin me if I did. I should have dragged him back to face a court-martial, but I didn't. I was young, too. I thought he'd learn, that he'd make it right." "And did he?" Poirot asked, his tone neutral. Harrow's laugh was hollow. "No, he went home a hero, thanks to his family's money and connections. Got himself a medal, he didn't earn. My men, those who survived, never forgot. Neither did I." Poirot nodded, his mind already piecing together the implications. "And this medal, Captain, it is important, oui? A symbol of his dishonor?" Harrow's eyes darkened. "You could say that." "Perhaps," Poirot said, rising from his chair with a deliberate grace, "you will permit me to see your quarters. A small matter, but it may clarify certain details." Harrow stiffened, his suspicion evident, but he nodded curtly. "If you must." They left the library, the manor's corridors stretching before them like the arteries of a sleeping giant. Harrow's room was on the second floor, a Spartan space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk cluttered with maps and a worn journal. Poirot's eyes swept the room, missing nothing, the neatly folded uniform, the faint scent of tobacco, the absence of personal touches. He moved to the wardrobe, his fingers brushing the handles. "May I?" Poirot asked, though his tone suggested it was not truly a question. Harrow shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Go ahead. Nothing to hide." Poirot opened the wardrobe, revealing a collection of clothes and a small leather bag tucked in the corner. He reached for the bag, his movements deliberate, and felt Harrow's gaze boring into him. Inside the bag, nestled among socks and a shaving kit, was a small velvet box. Poirot opened it, revealing a military medal, its ribbon faded but intact, engraved with Sir Reginald Blackthorne's name. Harrow's face tightened, but he said nothing. "This," Poirot said, holding the medal aloft, "is not yours, Captain. It belongs to Sir Reginald. A curious thing to keep, non?" Harrow's jaw clenched. "I took it after he died. Call it retribution. He didn't deserve it." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "Retribution, you say? And yet you claim you did not kill him. A man who steals a medal might also steal a life, might he not?" "I didn't shoot him," Harrow snapped, his voice rising. "I hated him, yes. I wanted him to suffer, to lose everything he valued, his name, his pride, but I didn't pull the trigger. I swear it." Poirot placed the medal back in its box, his expression unreadable. "Then tell me, Captain, where were you the night Sir Reginald died? The precise details, if you please." Harrow hesitated, his eyes flickering to the window, as if seeking escape in the moors beyond. "I was in the garden," he admitted at last. "I couldn't sleep. The air in this place, it chokes you. I went out around 11, smoked a cigarette, walked the paths. I saw Reginald through the study window, pacing, alive. I didn't go near him. And you saw no one else?" Poirot pressed. Harrow shook his head. It was dark. The mist was thick. "I heard something. A rustle, maybe footsteps, but I thought it was an animal. I went back to my room after that." Poirot nodded, filing away the information. The garden. The same place where he had found fresh footprints and a torn glove earlier that day. The pieces were beginning to align, but the puzzle was far from complete. "Merci, Captain," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "You have been most forthcoming. But I must ask one final thing. This hatred you carry, it is a heavy weight, non? Did it ever tempt you to act, to ensure Sir Reginald faced justice?" Harrow's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "I wanted him to pay," he said quietly, "but not with a bullet. I wanted him to live with his shame, to see his world crumble. Death was too easy for him." Poirot studied him, searching for the lie, but Harrow's gaze was steady, his pain raw and unfeigned. Satisfied for the moment, Poirot inclined his head. "Very well, Captain. We shall speak again. For now, I suggest you rest. The truth, it has a way of rising like the sun." Harrow said nothing, only watched as Poirot left the room, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. The next morning, Poirot rose early, his mind buzzing with the threads of the case. The manor was quiet, the guests still asleep, but the servants were already at work, their movements hushed as if afraid to disturb the lingering spectre of murder. Poirot made his way to the study, the scene of Sir Reginald's death. To reconstruct the timeline Harrow had provided, the study was as he had left it, the heavy desk, the shattered teacup, the misplaced book still askew on the shelf. Poirot knelt by the window, examining the latch. It was old but intact, with no signs of tampering. The locked room remained a puzzle, but Harrow's story had given him a new angle to explore. He moved to the desk, where he had previously found a hidden letter hinting at a scandal. Now he searched for something else, a clue to the timeline of that fatal night. His fingers traced the underside of the desk, feeling for irregularities, and found a small, concealed drawer. Inside was a pocket watch, stopped at 11:17. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. The watch was Sir Reginald's, engraved with his initials, and its frozen hands suggested the moment of his death, or close to it. Harrow had said he saw Reginald alive around 11, pacing in the study. If the watch stopped at 11:17, it narrowed the window of the murder. But how had the killer entered and left the locked room? The answer, Poirot suspected, lay in the manor itself. He left the study and descended to the ground floor, seeking the butler, Mr. Collins, a wiry man with a perpetually nervous demeanor. Collins was polishing silver in the dining room, his hands moving with mechanical precision. "Monsieur Collins," Poirot said, startling the man, "a question, if I may. The manor, it is old? Oui? Are there passages, perhaps? Hidden ways? Known to the staff?" Collins's eyes widened, his hands pausing. "Passages, sir? I'm not sure what you mean." Poirot's smile was disarming, but his eyes were sharp. Come, monsieur. An old house like this, it has secrets. Servants, they know these things. A passage, perhaps, leading to the study?" Collins swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. There's an old servant's passage, sir, behind the library. It's not used much anymore, but it connects to the study. For deliveries in the old days. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained serene. "And this passage, it is accessible? Show me, if you please." Collins led him to the library, where a section of the bookcase swung outward, revealing a narrow, dusty corridor. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mold and time. Poirot stepped inside, his flashlight casting a thin beam across the stone walls. The passage wound through the manor's heart, its path twisting until it ended at a small door, barely visible behind a tapestry in the study. "Magnifique," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. The passage explained how the killer could have entered and left the locked room, leaving no trace. But who had used it? Harrow, with his burning hatred? The priest, with his cryptic silences? Or someone else entirely? He returned to the drawing room, where the guests were now gathering for breakfast, their faces drawn with fatigue and fear. Clara's eyes met his, filled with a quiet plea for answers. The judge avoided his gaze, his brandy glass replaced by a cup of tea. Father Ambrose was absent, likely in prayer or hiding. Harrow sat at the far end, his expression unreadable, the weight of their midnight conversation still hanging between them. Poirot took his seat, his mind assembling the clues like pieces of a mosaic. The medal, the watch, the passage, Harrow's tale of betrayal, they all pointed to a truth just out of reach. But he was Hercule Poirot, and the truth could not hide from him forever. As the guests ate in silence, Poirot's thoughts turned to the next step. He would need to test Harrow's story further, to probe the others' alibis, to find the thread that tied the passage to the killer. The manor was a labyrinth of secrets, but Poirot was determined to navigate it, to uncover the heart of this moral mystery. And so, with a sip of his coffee, he began to plan, his little gray cells working tirelessly, ready to unravel the veteran's tale and the murder that bound them all. Chapter 9. The priest's silence. The air in Blackthorn Manor hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clung to the walls like damp moss on the Yorkshire moors outside. Hercule Poirot stood in the dimly lit library, his small, precise hands clasped. Behind his back, his mustache twitching faintly as he surveyed the room. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting fleeting shadows across the towering bookshelves, but it did little to warm the chill of distrust that had settled among the guests. The discovery of the hidden passage leading to Sir Reginald's study had shifted the investigation, like a chessboard tilted just enough to send the pieces sliding. Poirot's gray cells were alight, piecing together the fragments of truth scattered among the lies. Father Ambrose, the secretive priest, had become the focal point of Poirot's attention. The man's evasiveness, his cryptic remarks, and the coded message found in his Bible had painted him as a figure of intrigue. Poirot had summoned him to the library for a private conversation, away from the prying eyes of the other guests. The priest entered, his black cassock whispering against the polished floor, his face pale and drawn, as though the weight of his own secrets pressed down on him like a physical burden. "Monsieur Poirot," Father Ambrose began, his voice low, almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. "You wish to speak with me alone. I presume this concerns the unfortunate events." Poirot's eyes gleamed, sharp as a hawk's. "Oui, Father Ambrose. It is precisely the unfortunate events that bring us here. You have been, how shall I say, reticent? Your silence, it speaks louder than words, and Hercule Poirot listens to such silences with great care." The priest's fingers twitched, brushing against the silver cross hanging at his chest. "I am a man of God, Monsieur Poirot. My role is to offer solace, not to stir discord." "And yet," Poirot said, stepping closer, his polished shoes gleaming in the firelight, "you have heard something, non? Something that binds you to this crime, yet you hide it behind the veil of your vows. Tell me, Father, what did you overhear in the sanctity of your confessional, or perhaps elsewhere, that makes you so reluctant to speak?" Father Ambrose's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted to the window, where the moors stretched into the darkness, shrouded in mist. Poirot noted the hesitation, the flicker of fear in the priest's gaze. He pressed forward, his voice soft but relentless, like a tide wearing down a cliff. "You were near the study, Father, the night Sir Reginald was killed. You heard a plot, did you not? A whisper of treachery, perhaps, that you chose to keep silent. Why? To protect a soul? Or to shield yourself?" The priest's shoulders sagged, and he sank into a high-backed chair, the wood creaking under his. "Wait, you are relentless, Monsieur Poirot," he murmured. "Very well. I will tell you what I can, but I beg you to understand the confessional is sacred. I cannot betray it, even for justice." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And speak, Father, of what is not bound by your vows. Speak of the night Sir Reginald died." Father Ambrose drew a deep breath, his fingers tightening around the cross. "I was in the chapel, late that night, praying for guidance. The manor is old, its walls thin in places. I heard voices, angry voices, coming from the direction of the study. I could not make out the words, but the tone, it was venomous. One voice was Sir Reginald's, I am certain. The other—" he hesitated, his eyes flickering with indecision. "The other I could not identify." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache curving slightly. "And yet you did not investigate? A man of God, hearing such anger, does not seek to intervene?" "I thought it a private matter," Ambrose replied, his voice strained. "Sir Reginald was not a man who welcomed interference. I returned to my prayers, trusting the matter would resolve itself." "But it did not," Poirot said sharply. "And now a man is dead, and you, Father, hold a piece of the truth. There is more, is there not? The coded message in your Bible, it was no coincidence." The priest's face paled further, if such a thing were possible. "You are too clever." "Monsieur Poirot." "Yes, the message. I found it slipped between the pages of my Bible the morning after the murder. I do not know who placed it there, but it spoke of a meeting, a time and place in the garden. I assumed it was meant for Sir Reginald, but I kept it to myself, fearing it would implicate someone unjustly." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you did not think to bring this to Hercule Poirot? A message that could unlock the mystery of a locked room, a murder most foul? I feared." Ambrose's voice faltered. "I feared it would point to someone I care for, someone whose soul I am tasked to protect." I could not bear to be the instrument of their ruin. Poirot paced slowly, his steps deliberate, each one echoing in the quiet library. You speak of protection, Father, but your silence protects a killer. Tell me, who is this person you shield? The heiress, perhaps? The veteran? Or is it someone closer, someone within these walls, whose secret you guard with such devotion? Ambrose shook his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. I cannot say. I will not. Then you force Poirot to deduce, the detective said, his voice taking on a steely edge. And deduce I shall. Come, let us walk. The air in this room grows stifling, and the truth, it hides in the shadows. We shall find it together. Reluctantly, Father Ambrose rose, following Poirot as he led the way out of the library and down the manor's labyrinthine corridors. The walls were lined with portraits of Blackthorn ancestors, their stern faces watching as the two men moved toward the chapel. Poirot had a hunch, a whisper in his gray cells, that the chapel held more than prayers. It held answers. The chapel was a small, stone-walled room at the manor's eastern wing, its stained glass windows casting fractured colors across the pews. A single candle burned on the altar, its flame wavering as Poirot and Ambrose entered. The detective's eyes swept the room, noting the worn prayer books, the faint smell of incense, and the narrow door behind the altar, barely visible in the dim light. This is where you were that night, Poirot said. Not a question, but a statement. And from here, you heard the voices. Show me, Father, where they came from. Ambrose hesitated, then pointed to the wall behind the altar. There, he said. The voices seemed to come from there. The study is not far, but the walls. They carry sound strangely in this place. Poirot approached the wall, his fingers brushing the cold stone. He tapped lightly, listening for the hollow echo he suspected. And there it was, a faint, muffled resonance, betraying a space beyond. A passage, he murmured. The hidden passage we found leads here, does it not? The killer used it to enter the study, to commit the murder, and to escape, leaving. The room locked. Ambrose's eyes widened. You think the passage runs through the chapel? I do not think, Father. I know. Poirot's voice was firm, his certainty unshakable. He moved to the narrow door behind the altar, testing its handle. It was locked, but the keyhole was old, its mechanism simple. From his pocket, Poirot produced a small tool, a relic of his days working cases in Brussels, and within moments, the lock clicked open. The door swung inward, revealing a narrow, cobwebbed passage that descended into darkness. The air was musty, thick with the scent of earth and time. Poirot lit a small lantern he had brought from the library, its light casting eerie shadows on the rough stone walls. Come, Father, he said. We shall see what secrets this passage hides. Ambrose hesitated, his cross clutched tightly in his hand, but he followed, his footsteps echoing in the confined space. The passage twisted and turned, its walls damp and slick. Poirot moved with purpose, his senses alert for any clue. After several minutes, they reached a junction where the passage split, one path leading toward the study, the other descending deeper into the manor's foundations. It was here, in the flickering lantern light, that Poirot's sharp eyes caught something, a small, crumpled object caught in a crevice of the stone. He knelt, retrieving it with care. It was a handkerchief, its white linen stained with a faint but unmistakable smear of blood. Poirot held it up, examining the delicate embroidery. At its corner, a monogram. E. Ba. Eleanor Blackthorn, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. Or perhaps another with those initials. But this, Father, this is no coincidence. This handkerchief was dropped by someone fleeing the scene of the crime. Someone who used this passage to reach the study. Ambrose stared at the handkerchief, his face a mask of conflict. Monsieur Poirot, I beg you, do not jump to conclusions. Lady Eleanor is a good woman, tormented by her brother's actions. If this is hers, there may be an explanation. An explanation, oui, Poirot said, folding the handkerchief carefully and tucking it into his pocket. And Hercule Poirot will find it. But you, father, must decide, will you continue to hide behind your silence, or will you aid in bringing the truth to light? The priest's eyes were haunted, his voice barely a whisper. I will pray for guidance, Monsieur Poirot, but I cannot betray my vows. Then pray quickly, Poirot replied, his tone sharp but not unkind. For the truth waits for no one, not even a man of God. They retraced their steps, emerging back into the chapel. The candle on the altar had burned low, its flame flickering as if in protest against the secrets it illuminated. Poirot's mind was a whirl of possibilities, the handkerchief a tangible link to the killer's path. Lady Eleanor's involvement was now a question mark, but so too was the priest's role. Had Ambrose truly overheard a plot, or was he more deeply entangled? The coded message, the passage, the blood-stained handkerchief, all pointed to a conspiracy that ran deeper than Poirot had first imagined. As they stepped back into the manor's main corridor, Poirot paused, turning to Ambrose. One final question, father. The voices you heard, did they speak of blackmail? Of a secret so dire it warranted murder? Ambrose's lips trembled, but he nodded. Yes, I heard the word blackmail, and something about a fortune, but I swear I know no more. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Very well. But know this, Father Ambrose, the truth will not remain silent forever, and Hercule Poirot will ensure it speaks. The priest bowed his head, retreating to the chapel as Poirot made his way back to the library. The handkerchief burned in his pocket, a clue that shifted the investigation's weight. Lady Eleanor, the judge, the heiress, the veteran each had their secrets, but the monogram pointed to a truth Poirot could not ignore. The passage had revealed its first secret, but others waited, lurking in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor. As Poirot reached the library, the clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent house. He sat by the fire, the handkerchief in his hand, his gray cells working tirelessly. The priest's silence had cracked, but not broken. The blood-stained cloth was a step toward justice, but the path was still fraught with deception. Tomorrow, Poirot would confront the next piece of the puzzle, armed with a clue that could unravel the manor's darkest secrets. The fire burned low, and outside, the moors whispered their own mysteries into the night. Chapter 10. The hidden passage. The air in Blackthorn Manor hung heavy with suspicion, the kind that clung to the velvet drapes and seeped into the cracks of the ancient oak floors. Hercule Poirot stood at the mouth of the secret passage he had discovered, his gloved fingers tracing the rough stonework of the hidden door behind the study's bookcase. The passage, narrow and cloaked in shadow, smelled of damp earth and secrets long buried. A faint draught carried the scent of wax and mildew, whispering of footsteps that had tread here not long ago. His gray eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scanned the tunnel's depths, catching the glint of something metallic embedded in the wall. A concealed listening device, cunningly placed. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. Mon Dieu, the walls of Blackthorn Manor have ears, he murmured, his voice a soft cadence in the stillness. The device, a crude but effective contraption of wires and a small brass earpiece, suggested someone had been privy to Sir Reginald's private conversations. The implications were as tantalizing as they were sinister. Who had planted this? And what had they overheard that led to a man's death, locked in a room with no apparent exit? He stepped carefully into the passage, his polished shoes silent. On the uneven stone, the walls pressed close, and the air grew colder as he descended a shallow incline. His mind, ever the meticulous machine, churned through the facts. Sir Reginald's body, a gunshot wound to the temple, the locked study, the missing weapon, and now this clandestine corridor. The handkerchief he'd found in the previous chapter, stained with blood and bearing a monogram, lay folded in his pocket, a clue that pointed to an unexpected guest. But Poirot knew better than to leap to conclusions. The monogram could be a plant, a misdirection, or a truth yet to be fully unveiled. The passage opened into a small chamber, no larger than a pantry, with a single iron sconce bolted to the wall. A pile of discarded papers lay in the corner, yellowed and curling like autumn leaves. Poirot knelt, his knees protesting the cold stone, and sifted through them. Most were mundane old invoices, a faded map of the estate, but one caught his eye. A letter, half burned, with the words, "Eleanor, you must stop him," scrawled in a hurried hand. The signature was illegible, consumed by char. Poirot's brow furrowed. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne, the poised hostess who had summoned him to this grim affair, was now entangled in the web of his suspicions. He rose, brushing dust from his impeccable suit, and retraced his steps to the study. The listening device gnawed at his thoughts. It was not the work of an amateur. It required intent, access, and a motive that cut deeper than mere curiosity. As he emerged into the study, the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the room, illuminating the heavy desk where Sir Reginald had met his end. Poirot's gaze lingered on the portrait above the fireplace, a stern-faced Reginald, his eyes cold and calculating. "You, mon ami, were not a man who inspired love," Poirot said softly. "But who among your enemies struck the fatal blow?" The Manor's dining hall was a study in opulence and unease. Crystal chandeliers gleamed overhead, but the faces of the guests seated around the mahogany table were taut with apprehension. Lady Eleanor, at the head, wore a gown of midnight blue, her expression serene yet impenetrable. To her left sat the retired judge, Sir Harold Grayson, his jowls quivering as he sipped his wine. Clara, the young heiress, toyed with her fork, her delicate features clouded with worry. Captain Harrow, the war veteran, stared into his glass, as if it held answers to questions he dared not voice. Father Ambrose, the secretive priest, sat with his hands folded, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the walls. Poirot entered, his presence commanding despite his small stature. "Mesdames et messieurs, I trust you have enjoyed your breakfast." His tone was light, but his eyes missed nothing, the slight tremor in Clara's hand, the way Sir Harold's fingers tightened around his napkin, the priest's subtle glance toward Lady Eleanor. "Poirot, have you found something?" Clara asked, her voice betraying a flicker of hope. "You've been prowling about all morning." "Prowling is not the word, Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot replied, adjusting his mustache. "I observe, I deduce, I uncover. And this morning I have uncovered something most intriguing, a passage, hidden within the very walls of this manor, leading to the study where Sir Reginald met his unfortunate end." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's cup paused midway to her lips. "A passage?" she said, her voice steady, but her eyes narrowing. "Surely you jest, Monsieur Poirot. This house is old, but secret tunnels? That's the stuff of Gothic novels." "Yet the passage exists, madame," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "And within it I found evidence of surveillance, a device designed to listen to private conversations." "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, did you know of such a contraption?" The room fell silent, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire. Eleanor's composure wavered, her fingers tightening around the stem of her cup. I had no knowledge of such a thing," she said, but her hesitation was a crack in her polished facade. Poirot noted it, storing it away like a jeweler, examining a flawed gem. "Perhaps," he said, turning to the others, One of you might enlighten me. Sir Reginald was a man of secrets, secrets that someone in this house was desperate to hear. Captain Harrow shifted in his seat, his scarred hand resting on the table. Reginald was a snake, he said gruffly. If someone was spying on him, they had good reason. He'd blackmail his own shadow if it crossed him. Blackmail, you say? Poirot's eyes gleamed. A most interesting word, Captain. And what might Sir Reginald have held over you? Harrow's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sir Harold coughed, breaking the tension. This is absurd, he blustered. Reginald was a troubled man, but spying? Murder? You're spinning tailies, Poirot. Au contraire, Sir Harold, Poirot said, pacing slowly. The facts do not lie. The passage, the listening device, the blood-stained handkerchief, these are not tailies, but truths. And the handkerchief, Mies Amos, bears a monogram. A single letter, E. All eyes turned to Lady Eleanor. Her face paled, but she met Poirot's. Gaze with defiance. You cannot possibly think I had anything to do with my brother's death, she said. That E could belong to anyone. Or it could be a fabrication, planted to mislead you. Indeed, madame, Poirot said, inclining his head. But the truth, it has a way of revealing itself. And I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. That afternoon, Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Eleanor in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and portraits of Blackthorn ancestors. She sat by the window, sunlight filtering through the leaded glass, casting her in a halo of gold. Yet there was no warmth in her expression, only a guarded wariness. Lady Eleanor, Poirot began, settling into a chair opposite her. You are a woman of intelligence and discretion. I do not believe you are ignorant of the passage or the device within it. Si vous plaît, speak plainly. What did you know of your brother's activities? Eleanor's lips parted, then closed. She rose, moving to the fireplace, where she stared into the flames. Reginald was difficult, she said at last. He was my brother, but he was not a good man. He made enemies as easily as others make friends. When I inherited this estate, he came to me with schemes, business ventures, investments, all tainted with deceit. I suspected he was blackmailing people, but I had no proof. And the listening device? Poirot pressed, his voice gentle, but unrelenting. She turned, her eyes flashing. I installed it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not to harm him, but to protect myself. Reginald was planning something that could ruin us all. I needed to know what he was saying, who he was meeting. The passage was an old family secret, used by our ancestors to eavesdrop on rivals. I thought it would give me leverage. Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped. And what did you hear, madame? Her shoulders sagged, as if the weight of her confession pressed down on her. Enough to know he was dangerous. He was blackmailing every guest here, Clara, Harrow, Sir Harold, even Father Ambrose. Each had a secret he threatened to expose. Clara's affair, Harrow's stolen medal, Sir Harold's corrupt ruling, Ambrose's lapse in faith. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, I did not kill him. I only wanted to stop him. Stop him how? Poirot asked, his voice sharp. I don't. No, she cried, her composure breaking. I thought if I gathered enough evidence, I could force him to leave, to stop his schemes. But then he was found dead, and I was relieved. Does that make me a monster? Poirot studied her, his expression unreadable. It makes you human, madame. But the truth, it is not yet complete. The handkerchief, with its monogram, E, it points to you. Or does it point to another? Eleanor's eyes widened. Another? But who? That, Poirot said, rising, is what I must discover. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the passage, determined to uncover its final secrets. Armed with a lantern, he explored its twists and turns, noting every detail: the scuff marks on the stone, the faint scratches on the walls, the lingering scent of lavender familiar from the study. The passage ended at a concealed door behind the manor's chapel, its hinges oiled and silent. Poirot pushed it open, stepping into the cool, incense-laden air of the chapel. A single candle burned on the altar, casting long shadows across the pews. Father Ambrose stood there, his back to Poirot, his head bowed in prayer. "You move like a ghost, Monsieur Poirot," he said without turning. "What brings you here?" "The truth, Father," Poirot replied, stepping closer. "The passage leads here, to your sanctuary, and I suspect you know more than you have shared." Ambrose turned, his face etched with weariness. "I have told you what I can. My vows bind me. I heard a confession, one I cannot break." "Even if it conceals a murderer?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but piercing. The priest flinched, his hands trembling. "You ask me to betray my faith?" "No," Poirot said. "I ask you to trust that justice and mercy can coexist." "The handkerchief." "Father, its monogram is E. But it is not Lady Eleanor's, is it?" Ambrose's eyes darted to the altar, then back to Poirot. "You are too clever, monsieur. The handkerchief, it belongs to someone else. A woman who was here, briefly, before the murder. A woman whose name begins with E. Her name," Poirot said, his voice a command. "Esther," Ambrose whispered. "Esther Langston, Clara's former governess. She came to the manor the night Reginald died. I saw her in the garden, arguing with him. She left before the scream, before everything." Poirot's mind raced. Esther Langston, a name not on the guest list, yet tied to Clara, to the manor, to the murder. The monogrammed handkerchief, the passage, the listening device, all threads in a tapestry of deceit. He thanked the priest and left the chapel, his steps quickening as he pieced together the puzzle. That night, Poirot sat in his room, a single lamp illuminating his notes. The monogram pointed to Esther Langston, a shadow from Clara's past. The listening device confirmed Lady Eleanor's complicity, if not in murder, then in espionage. The passage explained the locked room, but not the missing weapon. And the letter, Eleanor, "You must stop him," suggested a conspiracy that reached beyond the manor's walls. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work. Esther Langston had argued with Reginald, fled before the murder, yet left her handkerchief behind. Was she the killer, using the passage to stage a perfect crime? Or was she a pawn, manipulated by another? And Lady Eleanor, her relief at her brother's death, spoke of guilt, but not necessarily of murder. Poirot opened his eyes, a spark of clarity igniting. "The truth," he said to the empty room, "lies not in one person, but in the web they have woven together." He resolved to confront the guests tomorrow, to unravel the final threads of this moral mystery. The handkerchief's monogram was a beacon, pointing to Esther Langston, but the full story, he knew, was yet to be revealed.